Sometimes I'm getting, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm getting, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Lisa.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and we got a fun one for you tonight. It's a bit of a twofer. We're going to be discussing a couple dweebs on the internet. Now, I say that with all due respect. A dweeb is somebody who's foolish in due to their studiousness or being overly intellectual. And so we're going to be looking at two characters you may be familiar with. First one is Peter Zeihan. He is a popular geopolitical analyst. And the other one is somebody who's in 2017, 2018, when he and a couple other scholars that we're going to discuss, Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, began to highlight the lack of rigor within critical theory and some of the various academic fields. Now, he recently got really upset with Jonathan Pageau when Jonathan began to voice a little bit of criticism regarding the Enlightenment. And this led into essentially a war or battle or feud with what he deemed the Ortho Bros and how terrible they are. So one of the people that got in the midst of this battle is our lovely Rachel Wilson, who will be joining us in just a moment. And she had a bit of a back and forth highlighting some of the lack of philosophical rigor with his own position in regards to his promotion of classical liberalism and the Enlightenment, despite it leading to many of the things that he then is critical of or condemning within culture, mostly critical theory, what he deems the radical LGBTQ movement, although he's in favor of the LGBTQ, it's just not the radical end, and then his cultural Marxism that he discusses. So we're going to be going over all these gentlemen. I got tons of videos, tons of receipts, if you will, to discuss. So first, just to introduce the characters, and then we're going to be, Rachel's going to be joining me, is the first one is Peter Zeihan. Now, I know some of you guys are quite familiar with him because he had a sort of growing YouTube channel. He's a geopolitical analyst and a bit of a know-it-all. Now, he is very intelligent, or at least seemingly so, but he basically does these videos telling you everything about everything. They're about 4 to 5, 6 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes on his YouTube channel. And he worked for a company called Stratfor after he sort of got disillusioned with his time at the U.S. Embassy when he was studying in New Zealand. And Stratfor, as we'll pull up, is an interesting geopolitical analyst company that has ties to all the intelligence agencies within the United States. Now, I became aware of Peter Zeihan due to his appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. And I thought, oh, he has some interesting ideas. Some of them being that he believes that globalization and the global economic market that currently exists, he believes is going to collapse. And this is going to lead back to basically a nationalistic framework for economic structures moving forward. And he discusses a lot in regards to the demographic collapse. So the lack of babies being made in the Western world, but really the world generally speaking. And so I started following some of his stuff. And when let's say the stuff in regards to Ukraine and Russia really began to heat up, I started to notice something, and that was the fact that Peter has a real animosity towards Russia and basically has gotten everything wrong about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So he hammers on about the incompetence of Russia. Here's a few of the things that he's discussed, that Russia was losing the war in Ukraine, which we have found is totally inaccurate. And in fact, the Ukrainians, unfortunately, and we have multiple articles showing that they have an excess of 500,000 deaths on the battlefield. He talked about how Putin is basically a KGB idiot. No matter what you feel about Putin one way or another, he's certainly not an idiot. He discussed the incompetency of the Russian military and basically how it's a joke and it's nowhere near what it used to be, or the sort of perception that we have of it due to World War II or the Soviet Union. He's also talked about their inability to create new technologies. And so Russia is basically an outdated country and an outdated infrastructure and an outdated military. He's also talked about how men were fleeing Russia as soon as the war happened. And this is part and parcel of what he considered a sort of lack of true patriotism and support behind Putin. So we'll discuss some of this stuff in addition. He also cites that China is basically a cult of personality and that he believes China is nowhere near the threat that contemporary people usually describe regarding, again, economics, potentially them taking Taiwan one way or another. And he says that basically it's a cult of personality. and that everybody is afraid to tell Xi Jinping the truth. And so he then lives in sort of this fantasy world because nobody has the gall to tell him what's really going on, or how China is relating to the geopolitical structure. And therefore, they're in a sort of lackadaisical fantasy world. Now, despite him saying all this stuff, we can look up articles that would insinuate the opposite, especially in regards to various financial firms here in the US or the Western world beginning to set up shop in China with a trajectory to do trillions of dollars within the next decade or so. So, again, we're going to be looking at all this. So he says that Xi Jinping is essentially a cult of personality. He has no idea what's happening in the world. There's going to be a major demographic collapse, both within Russia and China, and that that they're going to be basically insignificant on the world stage within the next, I don't know, 20 years, 10 to 20, 30 years, he suspects. And I have to say that as we go through, because once we start bringing up some of the receipts and some of the videos he said, he's basically the Jim Cramer of geopolitical analysts. And when we go through some of his YouTube videos today, I'm going to go to the YouTube comments and pull up the most recent, of which you'll see people are starting to catch on. So basically, everything he says tends to be the opposite. And this is true for his massive support for the COOF jibby jabs and talking about their efficacy and why we need to get them and all these different things. Of course, when we pull up the receipts in regards to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we're going to see that almost every prediction he has made has actually been wrong, and so on and so forth. So that's Peter Zeihan. That's the first dweeb of the internet. And I say that with all due respect, right? I'm not trying to be overly vicious in regards to our characters today. The second one is James Lindsay. James Lindsay has a PhD in mathematics. And James Lindsay has a lot of things that I would actually agree with. And I believe when Rachel comes on, she'll also signify how there's many ideas that he promotes that we would agree with. And so he came to prominence when Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose began to use critical theory in various academic papers and submitted in the various journals, of which I believe 7 of them got published, which were totally fictitious, made-up articles highlighting the lack of rigor within various academic fields. And this is when I became aware of him, because this was right in the height of the sort of Jordan Peterson phenomenon in like 2018. And they did a bit of a documentary highlighting what they were doing and highlighting how ridiculous their articles are and how they began to be published. He is currently one of the leading critics of cultural Marxism, critical theory, and what he deems the radical LGBTQ agenda. He is a self-proclaimed atheist and promotes what he describes as a secular materialist worldview, and he is a defender of what he calls classical liberalism and the Enlightenment. Now, I believe that he probably is consistent with much of the classical liberalism in the Enlightenment, but as we'll discuss further in the stream tonight, is that it's a lack of a sort of philosophical understanding of his own position and really intellectual history, and how much of the Enlightenment actually gave birth to many of the things that he then criticizes. And so it's really an arbitrary line of distinction between his movement and what he defends, and then what he's criticizing and what he believes is detrimental to the collapse of liberal societies in the West. He has recently become a major speaker within conservative and even adjacent Christian circles. So I know like TPUSA, he's like a keynote speaker, and he's been on, I believe, the Daily Wire and all these different conservative movements, highlighting and discussing sort of the intellectual roots of critical theory and cultural Marxism. Now, as I said, Jonathan Pageau, somebody who I believe they were, or at least Jonathan perceived them to be friends, he went after Jonathan when he posted a bit of a sort of a rhyming poem about the collapse of the Enlightenment and this collapsing of the faith of pure reason. This led to him going back and forth with many ortho bros, and including Rachel Wilson, where he just calls people nasty names, and he's basically then characterized orthodoxy as a belief in magic. Now, this is ironic because he also gives lip service to Christianity, but he's also then, again, this was like a year, 2 years ago, when he was really going on about Christianity and Gnosticism and totally mischaracterizing what Christians believe. But in all due respect, then, in regards to his worldview, I argue, and we're going to try to prove today, that he fails to see that his defense of liberalism and the Enlightenment leads to the things that he's fighting against. And part and parcel is that between the Enlightenment and modernity, there's a gentleman called Immanuel Kant who had this famous work called The Critique of Pure Reason. Because part of liberalism and the Enlightenment is the belief that man no longer needs God, man no longer needs religious authorities, because man can come to truth claims, come to understandings of liberty, equality, fraternity through the use of pure reason. But Kant highlighted that this actually doesn't work, and he undermined two major Enlightenment projects, that is Cartesian rationalism and sort of Baconian empiricism. And he identifies more in the empiricism side than the rationalist side in regards to philosophical traditions. So one of the things that he lacks is he uses a lot of moral and ethical language in regards to his critiques of critical theory and cultural Marxism. However, as a secular materialist, as an atheist, as I'm sure most of this audience be familiar with, where exactly does he draw any sort of metaphysical claims for universality, such as human nature? Because he defends humans and the special ontology of man and why he's afforded certain rights and so forth. However, as Kant undermined the metaphysical presuppositions of the Enlightenment itself, this led to new movements in philosophy. That's why Immanuel Kant is such a major figure and such a turn within the philosophical paradigms, leading to new methodologies, i.e. British empiricism and the methodology of phenomenology. So he has no metaphysical basis to actually make universal claims, and yet he uses a lot of ethical framework, a lot of moral language. Where are the laws? And he is a mathematician. And so it's interesting that because he denies God and essentially, as a secular materialist, denies metaphysics, and yet he's a mathematician. Where exactly do numbers come from? Where exactly are the laws of logic? Where exactly is number theory? And the point is that they're not in the material world. Where exactly are they? And if 2 + 2 = 4, and it always does, and that's unchanging, well, that puts a real dent into his worldview as a significant structure to criticize cultural Marxism and the things that we see in our culture. So he's very antagonistic towards Christianity. He mocks Orthodoxy specifically. I think maybe it's because we have more accurate criticisms of his worldview. And so I ask, and not that he's here to answer, but how exactly can he defend a non-socially constructed morality or an ethical system? He can't. So therefore, if his system is culturally constructed, how exactly is he going to undermine even the postmodernist, critical theory, cultural Marxism? Because it's really just a war against wills. Everybody's equally true. It's a sort of relativistic epistemology, even though he highlights how he believes in these sort of Enlightenment epistemologies and the use of empiricism and the scientific method and reason. But this is a failure to understand philosophy and how all this stuff aligns. So his precepts really aren't any better than the postmoderns and the cultural Marxists that he criticizes. And I hope by the end of tonight's stream, we're going to see that. And God willing, maybe he actually gets serious about his worldview and becomes a Christian, but we'll see. So that is what we're going to be getting into tonight. Smash that like for everybody who's here. If you want to support, I would ask that you please use the Streamlabs or the Dono chat links that are in the video description. Or if you prefer to use YouTube, and all those comments will be presented on screen. As always, I want to say if you would like to support my work, one of the best things you can do is become a website member, of which on the website, my last open panel got a little bit too spicy. It was asking, is nationalism truly on the rise? Looking at Geert Wilders and Javier Milei, Donald Trump, and some of the political movements that have been happening in the Western world. And that is now exclusively for members. You can find it on the premium section of Rockfin, or you can become a YouTube or a website member for $5 a month, and you can watch that whole stream there. Due to multiple recommendations, people said, hey, you should probably take this down. And I think they were right. So unfortunately, that is no longer on YouTube. But if you'd like to support my work, become a website member. We also have a fitness membership and a Logos premium membership. And you can do that with this link right here. So I would greatly appreciate that. And if anybody also wants to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. And we can talk about anything that you'd want to dive into, be it theology, philosophy, religion, magic, weightlifting, goal setting, masculinity, whatever anybody would like to talk about, you can do so with that link right there. And also, if anybody would like to sponsor a stream, you can do so with this link right here. So without further ado, I was initially going to keep my guest secret. I initially titled it My Special Guest, but I figured we might as well let everybody know. So welcome our sister, Rachel Wilson. How are you?
I'm good, Patrick. How are you?
Doing good. I appreciate you coming on. Of course, we had the stream scheduled last night, but we rescheduled. And so I appreciate you being able to make it tonight.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
So you, if you want to describe a little bit, I mean, we're going to get into Peter Zeihan first. I know that maybe he's not somebody you're totally familiar with, but you'll be able to go through some of these videos with me and see exactly what we're talking about. But before we get into it, do you want to describe a little bit of your interaction with James? Because we have all those Twitter sort of replies back and forth, and we'll be going through all of them once we get to him in the second half.
Yeah, so as usual, my Twitter spats are always in the news. The thing about James Lindsay is that I actually like a lot of his stuff. Like you were saying, I think he says a lot of things I agree with.
Right.
And the thing about him is people are constantly tagging me or him in reference to each other's work because he doesn't like feminism and he talks about how it has a lot of Marxist roots and he'll say it has Gnostic roots. Both of those things I agree with.
Yeah.
I do think there's more to it than that, but he's really close, right? So people will tag him all the time and be like, oh, you got to talk to Rachel Wilson about this. You got to read her book, and he's just always been very like, not interested in her, not interested in her book. And I don't know why. I mean, it could just be that because I'm just not like a big person. I don't have a PhD. It's totally fine. He doesn't have to want to read my book or anything like that. But, I was hoping that he and I could have like a good back and forth on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was responding to, the stuff he was saying about Peugeot. I've been really hesitant to criticize Lindsay too much because I'm like, yeah, I do want him to go after the Marxists. So I don't want to just attack him for nothing. But when he started to go after Peugeot, and then he said the thing that really got me going was somebody, he started criticizing Orthodoxy because of Peugeot. And then somebody sent him a screenshot of something of like what he's like, they're like, these Orthodox Christians have this theosis thing and they think they're going to become God. And he retweeted it and he was like, this is absurd mysticism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was just like, that is
he also
not what
highlighted that the word Orthodoxy uses the word nous. And he said, see, the Gnostics use the word nous. It's the same. It's like,
yeah. So I responded to him saying, look, you're too smart to jump into this Kool-Aid without knowing what the flavor is. Like you have no idea what you're talking about. Please just don't, because you just don't know what you're talking about. And he just kept going, right? And then he starts talking about the Enlightenment. So I just had to. I couldn't help myself, you guys. And I think that interaction got a lot of attention because I posed some questions to him that he just refused to answer that were very simple questions. So that's kind of the background on it. I still would love at some point to have a talk with him. He seems to think that I'm kind of a silly housewife lady who's not worth interacting with. And I totally get it. That's probably true on some levels, but I do love my philosophy, right? So Patrick and I are going to get into this today and we're going to tear apart all this nonsense.
Yeah, we're going to get pretty intricate once we get into the James Lindsay stuff. And we got interesting stuff because he recently has a beef with Jordan Peterson because Jordan Peterson, he's created this group called ARC and they had their first meeting, I believe, over in London. And I believe James Lindsay was invited, maybe was a speaker there. But one of the things he's lamented about is that he felt like it was almost a counter Enlightenment movement. Well,
Yes.
once Jordan Peterson got back from that, he actually did an interview and he actually said that he believes we need a counter Enlightenment movement. And this has caused animosity from James Lindsay towards Jordan Peterson. And obviously that led into why he was so critical of Paggio when he posted his stuff. So we're going to get into all that in the second half. But before that, join me as we go through the prominent geopolitical analyst Peter Zeihan. And so first, to begin some of our stuff, I want to say, what exactly is a dweeb? A dweeb is a person regarded as socially inept or foolish, which is the one that I'm using today, often on account of being overly studious. And so as we see, both these gentlemen aren't dumb at all.
Right.
Both of them are intelligent. Both of them are sharp in their certain ways. And I would say James Lindsay has been much more accurate in his predictions and criticisms than Peter Zeihan has been. But Peter Zeihan, he is, again, here's his Wikipedia. He's a geopolitical analyst, and he worked for this very interesting company called Stratfor right here in 2000. Well, you just do a little bit of digging here, research, and you find that Stratfor is a geopolitical analyst organization that works with companies such as Lockheed Martin, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Coca-Cola, and the Dow Chemical Company. And so you find here, Stratfor analysts pay for information, but also use open source information to predict where global crises will arise. Stratfor also obtains information by way of personal networks. Fred Burton indicated in linked emails that he maintained contact with his, quote, trusted former CIA cronies as a source of information, and that he was aware of the sealed indictment against Julian Assange in 2001. And so Stratfor has been very outspoken in regards to U.S. strategy in regard to Iraq and Ukraine following outbreaks or of turmoil in those regions. And so Peter Zeihan, this is what his website looks like. He speaks for large fees. He's traveling all over the world. And this is part of his sort of appeal on his YouTube channel, Zeihan on Geopolitics, that once he went on Joe Rogan, his celebrity status has really risen. And again, he's at over 500,000. He's at 671,000 subscribers now. But one of the things on all these videos that we go through, if you just go by newest, you'll see everybody's beginning to recognize that he's wrong on just about everything. And so you begin to think his work with Stratfor, it makes sense because he's always, now this is where you would think maybe he's never outspoken about his political affiliation, and he gives a lot of criticism towards people like Joe Biden or some of these sort of loony leftist politicians. He's also been critical of Donald Trump. But his whole thesis is that the globalist system that's in structure right now, especially mass production in China, is all going to collapse. And therefore, production is going to have to come back to the United States. Now, if you're a patriot or you're for your country, you think, okay, that's great. And so it's hard to pinpoint where exactly he is on the political spectrum.
Right.
But if you go through some of these videos, and we're going to test just a few, this one, for example, his COVID-19 jibby jab update. Again, just go to the newest, and you find people say, oh, saw you on Rogan. Very interesting. Decided to watch your content. Your jibby jab promotion turned out to be very misguided. Did not age well. And so watched some of Zion's Ukraine videos and thought he's got some interesting insight, wanted to know how accurate his prediction could be. Well, and he's continually been wrong of just about everything. So I want to play a little bit of his stuff and highlight how we can easily just do internet searches and find the exact opposite of what he said. And you wonder, and some of these comments have speculated, is he working for the CIA? Is he working for the U.S. intelligence agencies? Because he always comes out, again, he has like a little bit of a unique angle, but generally speaking, it's always promotive of the narrative. So we don't need to watch this one, just do because that's a touchy subject here on YouTube. But we'll just pull up some of his Russian stuff real quick and then go through it. And it's hilarious. So this one is on European sanctions cause Russian natural gas to collapse. This is only 2 months old. And so here you'll get a flavor of what he does. And he's in all his videos, he's always somewhere in the world. He lives in Colorado, so he's always hiking, and he does these videos that appear to be impromptu. So he'll be hiking, or he'll be in the midst of a hike, and he'll record his video giving you the intricacies of geopolitical strategy and what's going on in the world. And it's as if, oh, well, here, this is just a little tidbit I got for you. And then he'll throw it away. So when we look at some of his videos, he's all over the place in regards to, he'll be in Europe, he'll be in various parts of the United States giving speeches, he'll be in Australia. And so here's one that's more recent. And I want to go through, I pulled it. If you just put in, you see, I put in Peter Zeihan in Russia. We'll go back tons and tons of videos. Almost everything he said has turned out to be wrong. But here's one on the collapse of the Russian natural gas. And I got an article just to show you that, in fact, Russian natural gas hasn't collapsed at all. But here, actually, before that one, let's look at the Nord Stream, because this one's actually a year old. And so who do you think he suspects sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline, which pumped natural gas into Germany, which fed other aspects of Europe? None other than Russia. Russia blew up their own pipeline, of course.
Yes.
Now, we know, according to some whistleblowers and so forth, that it was actually the U.S. and pro-Ukrainian forces that did it. But here's just a sample of his stuff real quick.
Happy Thanksgiving week to everybody. We're going to have a series come out this week on issues that have come out of the Ukraine war in terms of economics and strategy and everything else. We're going to start with something that the Swedish government started announcing this past Friday.
Wait a minute, does he have a ponytail?
From the
Yes, he does have a man bun.
Jim Bob would say immediately, watch out because of the ponytail. So just putting that out there. He says that's like a precursor to starting a cult, you know, or what? You have to have the ponytail.
He does have a bit of a cult-like following. Now, I don't know if he's a sort of prototypical cult leader, but he definitely has a devout following in regards to his geopolitical analysis. But yeah, he's again, the point of today is to highlight that, hey, when you watch him, you know, just don't take it at face value.
Yeah.
Forensic work that they have done on the Nord Stream bombing. Now, Nord Stream is a natural gas pipeline that goes under the Baltic Sea from the Russian mainland to the German coast. And when it was operating, it was providing the German economy with 40% of their natural gas usage. And without it, we are talking about the beginning of the end of Germany as an industrial power. More on that later in this series. But the new news is that the Swedes have identified the type of explosive, and they've actually gotten samples from within the pipeline, which means that they've got their nose so far deep into where the evidence would be that they know exactly who did it and how. For weeks, Sweden has been unofficially pointing the finger at Russia. Sweden has by far the most capable navy on the Baltic Sea. Sweden has by far the most advanced sonar and forensic capability in the area. And on the day that Nord Stream was bombed, they started quietly telling their European partners that it was definitely the Russians who did it. And if there's anyone in the space that has the ability to identify what actually happened, it would be Sweden. However, they have not made their findings official in any possible way until now. And the question is, what has changed? And the question is, why have they not?
Now, we don't need to watch the whole thing, but again, you just go over to Seymour Hersh, who broke the story, how America took out the Nord Stream pipeline. And many people, similar to the jibby jab, many people who were critical or at least cautious, skeptical, were in the right. I remember when this happened and so many people said, oh, it was probably the U.S. Oh, it was probably our intelligence agencies. Oh, well, turns out that exactly was the case. And so here's just a little brief snippet of, again, his inaccurate predictions. And I'll share this link if you guys want to go. But even mainstream U.S. articles, this is coming out of New York Times. Now, I don't have a membership because I'm a sane person, but intelligence suggests pro-Ukrainian group sabotage pipelines, U.S. official says. Well, it was with the aid of the U.S., of course. Ukraine doesn't have the equipment to go down there and bomb the pipeline. It was the U.S., whether it be, I've heard speculations, whether it be the SEALs or intelligence agencies or secret mercenaries. I don't know. But if you read Seymour Hersh's article, which again, he got deplatformed, I forget from which social medias for even sharing this, it's pretty conclusive. So here is his Seymour Hersh's Substack. I'll share that with you guys if you guys want to read it yourself. We're not going to get into that today. Now, again, here is his stuff. So if you just go back, I have Peter Zeihan, Russia, and you have all this different stuff. Ask Peter, can Putin be assassinated in Russian demographics? Russian coup. So this was a funny one because I was already noticing that he was totally getting the Ukraine-Russia stuff wrong. And he fell for the whole coup thing, right? That the Wagner group, they're on their way to Moscow, that they're upset with Putin for killing all these Russians and getting them in a needless war. And then, of course, Wagner didn't want to do that. They maybe were upset, or some people speculate that it was actually a strategy the whole time just to maneuver and get over to Belarus and get on the north side of Ukraine. Now, nobody knows the exact details, but if you go back and watch his stuff, he was demonstrably wrong about all that. The collapse of the Russian Navy. Oh my gosh, this was just 3 weeks ago. Russian nukes in the test ban treaty. Russia's largest port is under attack. What's up with the Russian coup? Russian coups, Russia's global footprint. And then we're going to watch the 3 reasons why I'm leaving Twitter because like, who was it? Keith Olbermann recently. Yep. Peter Zeihan said he was leaving Twitter. And then, of course, within literally 1 day, he was already back on Twitter. Or I guess X
when
now.
People do that, it's like, just go then. You don't need to announce it to everyone and like give a big exit speech. Just leave.
Exactly. And that's exactly what he did. So we'll be looking at North Korea to provide Russian military aid. And this is because Russia is so inept and they're running out of ballistic missiles and everything that they need. They're so decrepit that they have to go and get the older weaponry from North Korea because they have like the 4th largest stockpile. Russia targets grain and power grid. Here's the Russian grab. We're all the Russian hackers. Now he was also very promotive of the idea of Russian bots, how this influenced the election. He highlighted that it was a joke, that anybody who speculated or questioned the results of 2020, that they're idiots. He mocked the Trump campaign and them arguing that it wasn't legitimate. But again, we're not going to touch that one because that's a real sensitive topic here on YouTube as well.
Yep.
But anyways, you see it, the collapse of natural gas. It goes on and on and on. He really has a beef to grind with Russia. And so to give a perspective, we'll watch this one real quick. This is the Russian grab. And so this is really the premise of his worldview. And so is he a misinformation agent? I don't know. Maybe he's really sincere in what he believes, but this is 6 years ago. So this is well before the events in Ukraine. And he's highlighting an accurate critique of Russian demographics and how they are below replacement, as almost all countries are at the moment. And then highlights basically their general strategic military plans moving forward. And so we'll just lay this out. This was 6 years ago, and then we'll watch some of these other videos to see exactly, again, how his narrative has progressed.
Russians are the flavor of the month. They're being a little persnickety. Let's talk about why. They're dying out too. 2 particular problems are on the short-term forecast for the Russians. First things first, here's your draftable age. At age 18 to 20, in 5 years, the number of potential draftees will drop by half. The Red Army, with half the size it has, is not a military threat to most of the countries that are around it. So if the Russians are going to use military force to achieve what they want, they have to do it now. Second, the average age of male mortality is 59. The Russian technical educational system collapsed back in 1989, which means that the youngest cadre of Russian engineers who have the full suite of technical training are now in their 50s. In 5 years, they're going to start dying in mass. And the Russians won't be able to maintain their infrastructure, their missile forces, their army, their electricity system. So if they're going to move, they have to move now. And here's where they're moving. This is Eurasia on its side, north at the top, or north on the right side. The green area, if you have to live in Russia, that's where you want to live. It's not too cold. I mean, it's still cold, but you can live here. You can grow food here. This is the part of Russia that's worth having. You'll notice, however, that these big gaps on the periphery before you get to any sort of reasonable geographic barrier.
The red zones are places you can hunker behind, mountains, deserts, seas. What the Russians have always tried to do is to expand to that outer shell and then plug the access points, these gaps. Now, the Mongols like these two in particular, the Persians the next two, the Turks invaded multiple times through the next two. The Germans, of course, have never met a square foot of Poland they didn't enjoy marching across. Sweden invaded Russia through the Balts twice, and here, everyone with a boat has invaded Russia here. Canada, yes, Canada has invaded Russia through the White Sea. If, with this degrading demography, the Russians can reach that shell and concentrate their forces in those gaps, they're going to last a lot longer. Otherwise, they're going to be trapped in this wide open area where potential foes can get at them militarily, culturally, economically, you name it, from a number of access points. During the Soviet period, the Russians controlled all 9 of these gaps. At the end of the Soviet period, they dropped from 9 to 2. With the seizure of Crimea earlier this year, they went to 3. 6 to go. 5 of those gaps are in the West. And for the Russians to get those gaps, they don't have to just take over Ukraine. They also need to take over Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, half of Poland, half of Romania, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. I'm going to guess that there are a few people in this room who know where those places are, because this is not a normal audience for me. How that will happen? There's a lot of ways it can go down. The Russians have all the tools here, and until the Germans are willing to dedicate troops to protect the Polish frontier, and just saying that out loud blows my mind, the Russians do not see any meaningful resistance. The sanctions don't hurt them in a way that would make them reconsider. Remember, this is a country that is convinced that it's its last generation. It's going to take a lot to get their attention, and financial sanctions won't cut it.
Okay, so Russia then is in the midst of trying to reconfigure their borders so that they can defend themselves, because they're in the midst of an incredible demographic collapse, of which includes technical know-how, because it's only the boomers that can keep the country afloat, and therefore they're going to become an attacking force on their various bordering neighbors. Okay, so where do we want to start? Let's go with some older ones.
While you're looking for one of those, I was trying to listen to him and read through some stuff on my phone about him while you were playing that. And the firm that you mentioned that he worked for 12 years, Stratfor,
Yeah.
I think you said in the beginning that it's connected to all these huge, giant international corporations like Lockheed Martin and Coca-Cola and Goldman Sachs, right? So these are all entities. They're kind of the usual suspects. They're the same international corporate players that we always see. So, I mean, like you said, there's no way to know if this guy is just kind of crappy at what he does but sounds good enough that people still listen, or if there's some other kind of agenda here. But I would say it doesn't really matter. We don't have to know for sure which it is to know that if these are your big clients, you can't possibly be unbiased. Like, this guy and his takes cannot possibly be unbiased if his biggest clients are international globalist corporations who push the woke agenda, who are all, have pushed the Russian narratives and stuff like that. And it's very bizarre that as a geopolitical analyst, he's really, really focused on this one thing. And I looked at the person who founded Stratfor. He's a Hungarian national who emigrated here around the same time as Zbigniew Brzezinski did. Kind of sounds very similar to that guy. And he's another person that was supposed to be one of these predictors of geopolitics who turned out to be like wrong quite a lot. He wrote a book in 1991 about the coming war between United States and Japan, that, it was just inevitable that we were going to have this giant military conflict with Japan. And I'm old, you guys, so I remember in 1991, I remember all of the talk about Japan being so far ahead of the US technologically, and Toshiba and Yamaha and all these Japanese companies competing with America, and people talking about a war and things like, and that all turned out to be used for strategic purposes. Well, I don't know if you could say it was used for that, but those narratives played into a lot of the big corporate conglomerate buyouts and things like that happened in the late 90s and early 2000s with the tech bubble. So I'm just in a quick glance, I'm noticing like a pattern
Right.
of why they might be pushing certain narratives in only certain parts of the world. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and he's also, and I got a video from Twitter that we'll watch when he was on Joe Rogan. It was right at the point when the crypto market was sort of hitting its bottom. And I think Bitcoin was around $16,000. Now, anybody who has crypto knows that today Bitcoin's above 42,000.
Yeah.
And in that video, he talks about how crypto is a facade, it's a pyramid scheme, that it's actually going to be negative within the next coming months. Again, totally turned out to be false. And it makes sense because at that time, the political institutions weren't necessarily in favor of crypto. Now they've invested quite a bit. And that's part and parcel of why Bitcoin is going back up, because they're going to utilize it with their CBDCs, which he also said, oh, yeah, the Fed Reserve has no interest in CBDCs. And then, of course, months later, we see the Fed Reserve absolutely say that that's what they're getting ready to do.
Just the fact that anybody would even believe him saying that the Federal Reserve would have no interest in central bank digital currency, of course they would. Like, if they wouldn't, who the heck would? I mean,
exactly. And so, guys, send in your super chats using Dono Chat or the Streamlabs link. We have one super chat that came in from Storm the Cat, throws in $5 and says, I noticed that the people who thought Ukraine would win are the same people who supported the jab. I don't trust their opinions, and rightfully so, Stormy Cat. I'm very similar and in the same camp there. So feel free to send your super chats, use YouTube, make comments, ask questions, and we'll address all those as we go through today. Now, here's one. This is from 6 months ago, and he says, what happened to the 500,000 Russian soldiers? So I haven't even watched this video, but I'm sure it's going to be quite interesting because, again, just popular let's see, I got articles all over the place, but I got mainstream articles discussing the fact that Ukraine is in fact having excess deaths of 500,000, and he kept talking about the spring offense, the summer offense, the Ukraine's getting ready to win, this is why we got to send more money. So I haven't even watched this one, but let's check it out.
Everybody, Peter Zeihan here. We've done a quick series on the counteroffensive that the Ukrainians have planned for this spring and summer. And a lot of you had questions, so we're kind of turning Q&A into a fourth video that features cloudy Colorado. Haven't seen the sun here in a few days. Probably are going to for a few more. So question number one, what happened to the 500,000 Russian soldiers that I was predicting 3-4 months ago were going to be on the field of battle by the time we got to June? Well, we're talking about Russian data and Russian information here. So, on the front end and now. But the best guess we have right now is that Putin was lied to. We know that Putin is stacking his inner circle with sycophants for quite some time. There's really only about 6 people who he talks to at all. Only 3 of them are competent. And the other 3...
Because, of course, Peter Zeihan would know the intricacies of what's going on in Russia and their inner circles of Putin.
Fortunately, are in charge of the defense industry and especially the military plans in Ukraine. The 2 personalities that matter the most, the first one is the defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, who is arguably the most incompetent person in the Russian government right now, and he's obviously in charge of the broader battle plan and the entire defense industry. And we now know that Shoigu has probably stolen personally 1/3 of the Russian budget that was appropriated for defense equipment manufacturer over the last several years, and probably 1/3 of, or a second third, was stolen by his underlings. So whenever you see the Russians just not having enough equipment to do anything meaningful, it's probably his fault, and he's the one in charge of the battle plan, and he's the one who indicated there were going to be a lot more weapons shipments. The second defense official, who arguably rivals Shoigu with his military incompetence, is the guy who runs the Wagner Group, Dmitry Prigozhin. This guy was literally a caterer until a few years ago, and then got a little bit of money from the Russian government in order to build up this paramilitary group that we know as Wagner that would go around the world hiring itself as mercenaries and committing war crimes when the local governments didn't want to. That doesn't mean he can't run a paramilitary organization, but it means he has no experience either managing or leading or participating in a military operation himself. And he has been leading the military operation in Bakhmut. Now, for those of you who have been following Ukrainian news, you know that the Russians have been throwing body after body after body after body against the Bakhmut city for 6 months now. And conservatively speaking, 20,000 Russians have died and 100,000 have been injured. The real numbers are probably significantly higher. How much higher, we don't know. But that means this one battle, which is not particularly strategically significant, where they've lost huge numbers of forces, taken a real bite out of any other conscription or mobilization programs that the Russian government has been instituting. So back to that 500,000 number. Best guess is that the Russians have lost at least 100,000, maybe as many as 200,000 men since the operation began. In addition to the at least 100,000 that were injured in Bakhmut and probably another 100,000 everywhere else. So let's add it up. When the Russians first came in February of 2022, they had about 140,000 men. They then did a partial mobilization that is as confirmed as anything as we can get with Russian data that brought in another 300,000. But if you're talking 100,000 injured throughout the war, 100,000 specifically in Bakhmut, and another at least 100,000 dead, that's the entire mobilization. So we're
Okay, well, we'll go on to some more videos, but again, you see the narrative, right? Russia is incompetent. Russia is lacking soldiers. Russia's losing. Ukraine's on the offensive. Well, if you guys remember, I did the stream Tucker Carlson and Colonel Douglas McGregor. Colonel Douglas McGregor, of course, has been ousted out of the military. He's a true patriot. He is supportive of much of the policies and worldview that we would support. And he's highlighted that these are just atrocious, ridiculous frameworks. Now, he doesn't mention Peter Zeihan specifically, but he says that Russia is currently in the process of building a standing army of 1.2 to 1.5 million people. And those are men. These aren't pregnant women in cockpits as the U.S. military is building. And he highlighted that they have a military currently around 700,000. So where Peter Zeihan's getting his numbers, I'm not sure. Again, he highlighted that if you've been following Ukrainian news, because of course we can always anticipate the accuracy of Ukrainian news.
Yeah, the trans person they had as their speaker for a while seemed very reliable. On that note, it appears that this gentleman may not be entirely of the heterosexual persuasion. I don't know for sure, but
I don't know either.
I was picking up some mannerisms and I thought, so I Googled some things and I couldn't find anything super conclusive, but there is a tweet from him, where he posts a picture of Pete Buttigieg and his husband, like holding hands, snuggling or whatever. And he says, leaving aside this article's moronic dumbassery, the subtext is important. Buttigieg's candidacy means gays are no longer in an ideological straitjacket. You can be gay and married, gay and Christian, gay and a veteran, gay and a banker, etc. You know what we call that? American. I think this tells us everything we need to know about his worldview. That
Right.
American means, what does my husband always say, everybody? That these people, when you just cut away all the ideological baloney of their worldview, at the bottom of it, at the core of it, is just the defense of gay sex. That's it. They will move heaven and earth. They will conquer nations, all for that. So, that's just interesting to me that he is
Very
so
interesting.
anti-Russia, he's so pro-Ukraine, and he's applauding Buttigieg and his husband, and he, thinks that this is the height of being American. To be American is to be gay. So.
Right. Very interesting. I'm glad you found that. And I've speculated, but I never knew anything in specific regards to what.
And we're not saying anything about this guy. We're just saying we're noticing some things.
Noticing patterns. So here's another video, which I haven't watched, but this is laughing at Russia won't solve all Ukraine's problems.
Everyone, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from rainy Colorado. It's been our wettest spring on record, and we're about to get a half an inch a day for at least the next 3 weeks. So anyway, last Friday, and then over the weekend, we had a lot of interesting statements out of specifically Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. The one that caught the most attention from people is actually pretty funny. And the statement is that Russia asserts that it has the world's second most powerful military, and a number of people believe them. But now people are saying that Russia is the second most powerful military in Ukraine. Now, I got a good chuckle out of that one because the Russians are not doing very well, and the Ukrainian counteroffensive is clearly deep into shaping operations. Before you
Totally false and wrong. Like, Ukraine is recruiting like 50-year-old men to fight right now because they're totally run out of soldiers, and they've been losing every battle.
you celebrate,
And he's just chuckling about it, though. He's just chuckling about it like it's so totally obvious.
Yeah, it's so obvious. How would you not believe that?
Yeah.
Again, I got a video we're going to play just a little bit of Colonel Douglas McGregor talking about the strength of Russia and how, again, nobody in the West knows anything of what's actually going on. But we'll get to that here in just a few.
Well, I will say one more thing. It's very CIA to act as though Russia is this backward, silly, falling apart country that they just live on vodka and potatoes and they don't have any technology. Like, that's a very cold, like old-timey Cold War narrative to believe
Right.
all of that. So
Absolutely. We got a super chat that came in over on the Dono chat. An
Yay!
anonymous donator throws in $20 and says, "Thank you for the content." Well, thank you, anonymous donator. Really appreciate the support. God bless you. And again, if anybody wants to show some love for today's stream, feel free to use Dono Chat, Streamlabs, or YouTube. All would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so let's watch just a few more minutes of this and see his angle here.
a little bit of history. I'm not going to talk about the weapons or the reserves or how many tanks the Russians have because, oh my God, they got so many.
oh my God, so many.
History. Russia has never been a capital-intensive power. It has always relied upon numbers to fight its war and for the weather to do a lot of the heavy lifting and for distance to inhibit the ability of its foes to function in its territory. What that leaves us with is a country that is both fragile and incredibly strong at the same time, historically speaking. And so when a country will come at the Russians with a technological advantage, especially when it involves movement, they will do great because once you break through the outer perimeter, if you can get fast and loose into Russian core territories, the Russians can barely move within their own territory. So whether it's the British at the Crimean War, or the French in early 1800s, or the Poles during the time of troubles, or the Japanese in 1905, it doesn't really matter what era of history you're looking at. You can find easily a major war where the Russians were absolutely crushed. But it's one thing to defeat Russia's armed formations, and it's quite another to eliminate Russia as a threat in the long term. One just requires hitting their troop concentrations and their logistics packages. The second requires root and branch or ripping up much of the industrial level infrastructure and the entirety of the governing structure over a swath of territory that is the world's largest national landmass. So I understand what Blinken is after here. He's trying to rally the alliance to give a lot now when it's going to really make a big difference to the Ukrainians. This is going to be a critical year for them. But on the other side of this, we're going to have to deal with either a resurgent Russia or a very, very bitter Russia that still has a few thousand nuclear weapons. We're at the very beginning still of a very long process. And even if this goes every way that people who are rooting for the Ukrainians hope, and this really is the beginning of the end of the Russian system, belittling them now isn't going to speed that process along, outside of kind of the tactical boost that it gets from people giving more weapons in the short term. Anyway, word of warning, I'm still rooting for the Ukrainians here, still hoping, and actually I'm pretty confident that Russia will cease to exist as a country in my lifetime. Love to see that forward loaded, but I'd like to see it without a nuclear exchange too. All right, that's it for me. Take care.
So this guy is hoping that Russia ceases to exist as a country in his lifetime.
Yeah. Yep. So you're getting a bit of the flavor again of all these of all his takes. And all these videos have hundreds of thousands of views. Hundreds of
Yeah.
thousands of views. I'm curious. Let me go back to the one I was just at. Because what I love to do on his videos is go down here, go to recent comments, and see everybody who's keeping the receipts. This one, update. Russia is the second strongest military. Oh, Russia is the second strongest military in Russia. So again, somebody who agrees. Okay. Lots of wishful thinking. That was 4 months ago. So this was 5 months ago. These videos are all from this year. Here's one on, again, Russia's natural gas collapse, which I have an article to show the exact opposite, in which Russia is now selling natural gas. They're planning on creating a hub in Turkey and potential moves towards Iran and China, of which they wouldn't even need Europe to sell natural gas to. And one of these, I think I have one on the Nord Stream. We'll get to the Nord Stream one right here. So let's play the Nord Stream one, because this was 1 year ago. This was right when, did we already watch this? No, we watched this one.
Yeah.
And so here's him. This was 2 months ago on natural gas. The Russian natural gas is collapsing, guys. Here we go.
Predating the Soviet collapse. And the reason is pretty straightforward. The Europeans have tried to cut their dependence upon Russian natural gas to zero, and at least in terms of the piped natural gas, they've been pretty successful. Now, this is something that is not...
Now, of course, they were dependent upon natural gas during Trump, and they've only cut natural gas because the Nord Stream pipeline was bombed, so they can't even get it.
Exactly a shock to people who are familiar with the industry. There are many aspects of the sanctions that are working better than others. This is one of the ones that's definitely working better. And the reason is the nature of natural gas itself. Natural gas is a gas, and it takes a specialized system to produce it, to transport it, and to export it. And if there's a gap anywhere along the system, whether it's insurance or the pipes or the pumps or the legalities or whatever it happens to be, the whole thing stops, and it can't easily be redirected. And in the case of the Russian stuff that goes to Europe, almost all of it comes from an area called Urengoy, which has been in production now for a half century, goes down a couple thousand miles of pipes through Ukraine and Belarus into Poland, Germany, Slovakia, Hungary, and the rest. And since this can't be redirected, when the Europeans stopped taking deliveries, the Russians had to bit by bit shut everything down. There are other natural gas options that the Russians have. There's some that comes from eastern Siberia, well east of the Urals, that goes south into China. There are a couple liquefied natural gas facilities, one on Sakhalin Island, primarily, which goes to Japan, and one on the Yamal Peninsula, which primarily gets shipped to Europe. And those are still working mostly, but we should expect even those to go offline in the not too distant future. The problem is that those other facilities, the Yamal LNG, Sakhalin LNG, and it's called Kovikta, which is a field in the general vicinity of Irkutsk, out near Lake Baikal. Those are all much more technically challenging, and the Russians didn't do any of the work to bring them online. That was almost exclusively done by foreigners, with British major BP being the single largest player, but the Japanese Mitsui and Mitsubishi are involved in Sakhalin, as was ExxonMobil. And most of those companies are now gone. The Japanese are still involved in Sakhalin, but ExxonMobil and BP have just cut their losses and left completely. And the Russians do not have the technical skills necessary to maintain those projects in the long term.
Okay, so again, Russia is inept. They can't even maintain their own natural gas pipelines. And so they're going to eventually, if you watch the rest, it's all going to collapse here in the near future. Well, just a brief internet search, and I limited mine to the last month. Russia expects to reach agreement on gas hub project in Turkey soon. So they're now going to be supplying all of Turkey with natural gas. That doesn't sound like they would be creating new projects and new hubs if they lack the total capability of even maintaining, let alone creating new pipelines. So again, we see another L for Peter.
I'm wondering, like, as I'm reading about him and listening to him talk and what the company he worked for, Stratfor, and then now he's founded his own, I've often wondered about these companies because I come across them all the time in my research for other things. These risk assessment companies that like all of their clients are these huge international corporations, and they're like, oh, we're going to forecast things and do this really complicated risk assessment stuff for you. And these companies pay them millions of dollars
Yes.
for this stuff. And you think to yourself, when that much money is at stake, why would they not try to wag the dog a little bit at least? You know what I mean?
Right.
Why would you, as an corporate intelligence gathering entity, just sit back and hope your predictions are good and your forecast models work? Why it seems to me like there's a lot of incentive to push things a certain direction, which is what I mean, he kind of gives it away, right, in the videos that we're watching, where he kind of
Yeah.
says, I'm hoping things happen like this. This is what I'm rooting for, this is who I'm rooting for.
Yep.
So you wonder then, what's the actual gig here? Because if you were a big company, say you had some kind of international company, and you go to him and you're going to pay him all this money to do intelligence gathering and risk assessment for your company, and this man is putting out videos where he says he has a vested interest in certain outcomes, it doesn't seem like you'd be getting like really fair and unbiased analysis that's going to help you. It seems like you're supporting a person who is has a vested interest in certain outcomes. Do you guys know what I'm
Clearly.
saying?
Yep.
I don't want to make accusations for legal reasons, but it just seems like a conflict of interest.
Exactly. And just as the commenter says, he guarantees this guy is being paid by the government to put out these videos as a social influencer. Potentially. It sure seems like it. Again, if we went back and put in China instead of Russia, his whole thing is about how incompetent China is, how laughable they are, how Xi Jinping knows nothing of what's going on. And yet, if you watch the fact that Gavin Newsom went and got on his knees, essentially, metaphorically speaking, in front of Xi Jinping in China, and then he set up, offered the sort of summit meeting in San Francisco, cleaned out everything, had Chinese flags everywhere. That doesn't seem like people are of the same opinion that are in actual geopolitics, that they are quite interested in submitting or at least accommodating China to the greatest degree possible. And we know that the Biden administration and the Biden family has been receiving money. Of course, we know the Burisma scheme out of Ukraine, and of course, the payments out of China that include millions of dollars. So here, I'm just going to grab another one. This is from 2 months ago, and this is why North Korea has to help Russia with military aid.
Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona. Today we have to talk about the summit between the strongmen of Russia and Korea. So Vladimir Putin on the Russian side and Kim Jong-un on the Korean side. They met in one of the Russian cosmodromes in the Far East, and the primary topic was whether or not the North Koreans can provide the Russians with military assistance, which for anyone who has a sense of history, the irony here is practically bleeding out of the sky. Anyway, the issue, of course, is that the Russian war in Ukraine is not going to spec. And when you have a conscript heavy force like the Russians do, you try to use standoff weapons that aren't particularly smart in large volumes, specifically artillery. If you exclude either China or the United States from the math, Russia has more artillery than the rest of the planet combined. And best guess is by the end of this year, they'll have gone through over 20 million artillery shells. Artillery shells don't age particularly well. And after they're more than like 10, especially after 20 years old, the explosives start to crystallize a little bit. And that can make things decidedly lively when you try to, move them, especially when you try to launch them. So the Russians have had a lot of accidents with the transport system, their logistical system. And then, of course, they've had a lot of barrels and the artillery just blow up from the inside. All of these are bad things if you're trying to launch a lot of artillery. So they need more shells, and they're turning to North Korea, which I believe has the world's 4th largest stock of artillery. The problem here, of course, is that North Korea's industrial plant isn't exactly great either, and a lot of the North Korean stuff is actually older than the Russian stuff. Gives you an idea of how desperate the Russians are for ammo. Now, the question, of course, is what do the North Koreans get in return? Because the Russians don't have anything from a trade point of view that's of use. You might be able to send a few tankers of crude oil, but the Russians honestly need that for hard currency earnings. So the question is if there's anything else that can be transferred. In terms of military technology, there really isn't. One of the things that the Indians have found out recently, that they've been developing missiles and planes with the Russians where the Indians provide a lot of the capital and then the Russians provide the technical know-how. And what they've discovered is...
Remember, they don't have the technical know-how, as we saw in earlier videos.
Right. I was just
actually
thinking, wait, I thought they were
because
backwards and didn't know how to do
Russians
any of
have no
this.
capacity to manufacture even moderate numbers of planes. So they're now starting to back out of all their contracts because they realize that the Russians have been lying to them the whole time. In addition, there's some talk of like maybe a nuclear-powered vessel or submarine, but it's taken the Russians 15 years to build their last nuclear-powered ship, which was an icebreaker. So the argument to be made here is whether or not the Russians even have the capacity to sustain their existing nuclear naval fleet, much less build new ships for themselves, much less have surplus to transfer to North Koreans. And honestly, it's looking pretty poor for that. That doesn't mean the Russians have nothing, and it doesn't mean that that's not a problem. It's just probably not going to be the things that most people are talking about. Look at where the meeting was, the Cosmodrome. This is a facility out in the Far East that the Russians built when they lost control of the Kazakhstan Cosmodrome at the end of the Cold War. And when it comes to launching satellites or intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Russians are still one of the few places in the world where that technology can theoretically be obtained, even if the Russians have lost the capacity to build a lot of new stuff themselves. So the primary global concern, primary regional concern for North Korea is missiles, long-range missiles, and that is something the Russians have in spades. So whether it's officially part of a program to launch a satellite into space, which, whatever, or more likely to deliver a payload to another hemisphere, that is something the Russians can and probably are willing to transfer to the North Koreans because the Russians are no longer party to any meaningful arms control treaties at all.
Okay. So you guys get the gist here. Everything he basically says is wrong. Just for kicks and giggles, I want to put in China just so you can see I'm not making any of this stuff up. And let's see where I want to see one where he talks about the ineptitude. I don't know if anything. Here's 2 months ago. Again, I haven't watched this one. Let's check this one out.
Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from Colorado. Now, last week I released a video on why none of us should be really surprised if the Chinese system falls apart. We'll leave the link here for those of you who have not seen it. But the most common follow-up question that I've received from viewers has been, wouldn't this justify in the Chinese mind a diversionary war, a distraction war to increase public support? I can't rule it out, but I don't think that's going to go down for 3 reasons. Number one, this is not a democracy. This is an autocracy where the CCP's control of the public space is huge and their ability to shape public opinion is massive. And in that sort of environment, you don't get the same relative effects, and you also don't have the same instability from economic problems that you might have in a more pluralistic society. So I don't want to say no, but the government's ability to shape public opinion and to stir up nationalism is pretty robust. If anything, the government sometimes has a bit of a problem containing the nationalism, not getting it going. So from a legitimacy point of view, I don't think it's really necessary. Second, anyone in China who can read a map and do math knows that if they launch a war for Taiwan, it will not end well, not in the war itself, but what happens to the next day. China is dependent upon the international community for roughly 3/4 of their energy sources, and most of that comes from a continent away. On top of that, China is, in terms of absolute volumes, the most dependent on imports and exports of any country in the world. And they import the vast, vast, vast majority of the materials that allow them to grow their own food. So if you have even a moderate effort by a small number of countries to go after Chinese commerce in the aftermath or because of a war, this country will be facing a industrial collapse in just a matter of months and a famine that'll kill half the population in a couple of years.
And I have no doubt that at least several years ago that the Chinese leadership understood that. And so they primarily used Taiwan as a rhetorical issue. And most of the threats that we're seeing now are not necessarily coming from the decision makers. Third, let's assume that the Chinese can capture Taiwan in a matter of weeks with minimal damage. That doesn't really give them anything. I mean, yes, it technically is a break in the first island chain, but the Chinese are still dependent upon the international system to get everything that they need. And they're dependent on the US Navy to patrol the global oceans so that their commercial cargo can come and go. In fact, this would actually put their potential sea lanes by Taiwan in greater risk from the Japanese, who have a better, longer range Navy than anything that the Chinese have. And then there's talk of the semiconductor industry that the Chinese would be able to, but the Chinese can't operate their own semiconductor industry. It's not just run with foreign equipment and software, it's run by foreign personnel. And the Taiwanese facilities are the most advanced in the world. And honestly, the Chinese wouldn't know what to do with it. I don't mean that as a slam to the Chinese. I don't think any country that took them over would be able to operate them in anything less than a decade time frame. For the Chinese would take a lot longer than that. So it really doesn't check any boxes. Now, saying that it wouldn't work, saying that a diversionary war would be unwise and would achieve nothing for the Chinese is not the same as me saying I don't think it would happen. But the rationale would be very, very different. So two things. Number one, it could be a miscalculation, not in the traditional sense that, we don't think anyone will do anything, but miscalculation by Xi. Remember that Xi has formed such a tight cult of personality that no one's bringing him information. So he's literally making decisions in a box without any idea of the information that flows in or the reality of the world around him. In that sort of decision-making structure, sure, he could pull the trigger, but it wouldn't be because of any of the reasons that you would normally expect. So whether it's economic, strategic, political, or whatever we would say, this might force a country to pull the trigger, none of that applies to Xi because it's all in his head. And it's not something that we can really guess at because we don't know what's shaping his decision-making because we know he's not being fed the information he needs to run the country. The second reason is quite darker. If you're like me, and you believe that we're looking at the end of the Chinese system over the next decade for demographic reasons alone, forget politics, forget energy, forget vulnerability, forget the debt, forget trade wars, forget everything else, then there's something to be said for pulling the trigger. Because if the Chinese system is facing that same industrial collapse and that same population collapse for other reasons, and there's nothing that the Chinese government can do to stop that, maybe by a little bit of time and that's it, then pulling the trigger, choosing the time and the place of a war, even if you think you're going to lose, even if you know it's going to result in the death of half your countrymen, if it allows you to command the narrative of the future, well, that means that the CCP, for the low, low price of half the country's population, might be able to rule into the next era of Chinese history. And if you're completely amoral about it, you got to admit that might be a compelling reason to launch a war that you know will destroy you. Pretty dark, not saying that's happening, but we can't rule it out at this point.
Okay, there's another big part of this that we haven't mentioned, which would not just apply to this gentleman, but to all of the people who do this sort of thing, which is that if he's really an intelligence gathering person, and this is like what he does for a living, he can't come out and tell everybody about it. So there, it would be one of two things. Either you don't have inside intel, which I tell people this all the time. Whenever people make bold assertions about, what's going on in the Middle East or what's going on in Russia, I'm like, there's intelligence that even officials in that country don't know about and won't know about for 20 years, right? They're not going to know about it because there's always a whole nother layer of totally crypto intelligence that even a lot of the regular people who govern a country do not know about. People during the Bay of Pigs, a lot of the government officials didn't know the stuff that we now know about that conflict, 60 years later.
Right.
So there's always that. So if he doesn't know those things, then he doesn't know what the hell's going on any more than you and I do. And if he does know those things, he can't come out and talk about them. So
right.
So there's got to be some other reason for him doing this.
Exactly. Again, I don't know his intentions. I don't know, as we neither one of us are claiming to know. but it certainly raised a lot of questions. And his dismissiveness of China and Russia constantly. Again, what I just picked a random video, you guys, on China. I hadn't even watched that one yet, and included everything I told you guys. It's the same rhetoric, it's the same narrative. And the thing is, though, he gets invited, because you can find videos where he gets invited to some of the most elite, again, Western geopolitical analyst conventions and stuff. He speaks for exorbitant amount of fees. He's, again, his videos, he's always traveling. He's always in different places giving speeches. And it's hard to tell. Does this guy really believe the stuff he's saying? Is this a misinformation? Is this a way to alter narratives and perception? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But his track record is terrible.
Yeah, it sure is. And it's like you said, him talking about, and I can see how, I feel like he's one of these people that he says just enough things that sound right that a lot of people would buy in, right?
Right.
So when
He's clearly articulate and intelligent. Like he information like on these videos, but the framework of it makes no
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and he's talking about, the Chinese era, the Chinese system is going to collapse because they're facing population collapse. True, but China is not facing much more of a demographic collapse than any number of other countries. South Korea is by far the worst. I mean, they're at 0.78. Many other countries are lower than China is still. And the fact that, like he's talking about the CCP being so impenetrable and being an autocracy and having this incredible propaganda machine, which is all true. But if that's the case, then his predictions about, because I saw some of the other videos you were scrolling through, is him talking about like what's China's real population and stuff. It's like, well, you wouldn't know then. If the CCP runs the way it does, then how would you know what their true demographics are, but nobody else does? And you're going to tell me this in this YouTube video. Like,
Right.
I'm going to get the real inside tip along with 600,000 other people who subscribe to this channel about what's really going on in China.
Right. And that's the whole premise for his book on the revival of sort of nationalistic economic policies, is because all these demographic collapses, and that China is no longer going to be the manufacturer hub, and America is going to have to bring all their stuff back. And he does. I watched the whole series where he breaks down the demographics of countries all over the world. And again, in some of the stuff, like he uses true information. So you can go up, like in his videos on demographics, look it up, and yep. Okay. At least according to the sources, not that I know anymore, but okay, he's using at least information that we would find to make arguments and makes those claims. But when it comes to these larger geopolitical issues regarding China and Russia or Iran, those are the three that he's constantly wrong about. It's like, well, that sure fits the sort of Western propagandist narrative pretty darn well.
Yeah. And one of the things, everybody knows that I do a lot of feminism stuff, but the two other things I think I'm really good at is the history of propaganda, and then like the clandestine operations like MK Ultra. I know a ton about that stuff. I've done like lots and lots and lots of digging on those things. And when you look at the history of propaganda, one thing that's good about it is that there's a specific formula and pattern that they figured out over 100 years ago, right around World War I-ish. They really figured out, because this is the beginning of the mass communication era, the printing press, and then radio being like the brand new thing, in the beginning of the 20th century. And they really hammered out a very specific formula for propaganda that works in the mass communication age. So if you know that pattern, you can spot it. And what he's doing is really typical of propagandists, which is, like you said, he's just hammering Russia, China, Iran. And that's the Bush era axis of evil stuff. And this guy's career started right around the year 2000.
Yep.
Right when all of this narrative really, it had been being formulated, and they put it out right around this time. And so he's just towing the typical neocon line of like, there's this axis of evil, and there's this assumption that these countries are bad and our countries are good, and it, like, he's really just fitting the formula, and even the way that he delivers the information fits the formula. I just kept thinking while I'm watching him, it's very wagging the dog. It's like he wants to put stuff out to convince you that he has some kind of special information, some kind of special access. So therefore he knows what's going to probably be coming. And so you should have this opinion. You should take, because people obviously, like, why would they watch this? They're going to watch his stuff to like decide what to do with their investments, to decide what companies to support, to decide what political stuff to support. Like, he
Right.
is kind of wagging the dog by doing this. So
Right.
it fits,
Yeah, and I
it fits
suspect
a
that's
really long pattern.
Yep. And we got a few super chats that came in. Shout out to Blue Skittle, throws in $5 over on Dono Chat. Thank you very much, Blue Skittle. No comment. And then we had a few over on the Streamlabs. Shout out to Frankie D, throws in $10. Says these guys are making massive gains and setting records, and the cope lift. Yeah, they are. Their only competitors are Roman Catholics with Pope Francis. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then thank you so much, Frankie D. God bless you, brother. And thanks for all the support you give me. And Vladimir throws in $10 and says, God bless you both. You restore my faith in Americans. Seriously. Well, thank you very much, Vladimir.
Well, thanks. Yeah.
God bless you, brother. And thank you for the $10 super chat. And then Tinfoil Hat Girl throws in $5 and says, Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter have done scathing critiques of Peter Zeihan. Check them out. Their analysis on Ukraine and Israel have been spot on. I'm not familiar with Garland Nixon or Scott Ritter. Are you familiar with who they are?
I'll write him down though.
Yeah, I'll write that down too. And I will look into that Tinfoil Hat Girl when we get offline. So thank you very much for that. Okay. Now I want to wrap up on Peter Zeihan. There's a few more things I just want to show. And then we're going to get into the James Lindsay beef, which I'm sure that's what everybody's waiting for. So
everybody loves a little drama.
Yeah, they do. That's what sells.
It's not so bad. It's not so bad. I think we're gonna have, good takes.
So I wanted to highlight. So like one of the things that Peter was in support of was what he called or described as the sanctions on Russia were going to harm them economically. And I wanted to show a little bit of this of Colonel Douglas McGregor, but one of the things that he highlights is that the ruble's never been stronger. And so I went to a website here, Trading Economics, looking at the Russian ruble, and dang, that does not look like the Russian ruble is on the downturn. This is a 25-year analysis of the ruble. And if we look at the last year, it has been also here. Come on, let's go. Why is this not working? There we go. If we look at the last year, it's also been on a direct rise. Now, maybe it's dipped a little bit, but our Western sanctions on Russia have not been effective at all. And it's only led them to create better trade deals with our perceived. Oh, I don't even have it up, do I? Oh,
there you go.
Here we go. So here is the 25-year analysis I was talking about. So look at in 1999 where the ruble was. And then boom, it's up here. So it's definitely on the higher end of its trajectory within the last 25 years. Yeah. And if we look at the last year, it's still in a pretty solid position. And it's only been on the rise. It's dipped a little bit. But like I was saying, this has caused them to create economic relationships with China, Iran, and Turkey to a much significant degree. Of course, they have military bases in Syria, so they have a presence in the Middle East as well. And of course, all those guys are America's biggest boogeymen. So very interesting. Now, we're just going to play a minute of this, but this is where I much more agree with Colonel Douglas McGregor. And maybe he gets some things wrong, but his analysis, according to my own research, looking to what he's saying, has been much more spot on than anything Peter Zeihan has said. And so I'm just going to play a few minutes of this where he talks about how Russia is stronger than ever.
And today, Russia is stronger, I would argue, economically than it was before the war began. Our sanctions have been ultimately quite helpful to the Russians. They are not a part of our Western financial system to the extent that they might have been hurt by us seriously.
How have the sanctions been helpful to Russia?
Well, they've managed to sell all of their energy products, all of their minerals, everything, agricultural products through others at higher prices that have ultimately reached their target destination in Europe and other parts of the world anyhow. So the amount of hard currency, if you will, from the West that's pouring in has actually increased. At the same time, they've discovered that they could sell virtually everything if they needed to China and India to a lesser extent. Those two countries, these are over 1 billion people in each country, enormous economies. They want to do business with Russia. So the absence of the European market per se has not turned out to be this terrible experience that everyone in the West assumed it would be.
Wasn't that a chess game a lot of people saw coming, because both India and China will never be self-sufficient on energy?
Well, I suppose so. I don't know that anybody regarded it as a chess game, because the difference between Putin, whatever mistakes he made in terms of assumptions, shrink to insignificance next to the mistakes that we've made, I would argue, because we made assumptions about Russia that were just completely wrong, just like the rest of the world. Number one, Russia is a backward economy that will collapse quickly if we sanction it. In other words, they're not a true nation state in the Western sense. They don't have a developed economy. They can't survive.
Yeah, we regarded it as some sort of mega island.
Yeah. They don't have a real scientific industrial base. Now suddenly we see all of these factories in Russia running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, producing ammunition, weapons, missiles, all these things we said they were going to run out of very, very quickly and couldn't replenish. We said that no one would support Russia, that Russia would be isolated. Well, in fact, I would argue that most of the world actually backs Russia against us, that we and the Europeans are increasingly on an island all by ourselves. And Russia is not going to fall apart. Russia has become more cohesive. This is a state that rests on the foundation of Orthodox Christianity and Russian ethnicity. Now, there are plenty of people inside Russia who are not ethnic Russians. Those people are treated very well. They are treated as equal partners inside Russia. All you have to do is look at the Chechens, and the Chechens are brilliant soldiers, by the way. I keep hearing people say, well, they're not really that good. Well, you could not be more wrong. Those people are superb, and they are fiercely loyal. And by the way, if you go back to the Tsarist period, every Tsarist army had contingents in it that were Kazakhs, Uzbeks, Chechens, others, Turkic peoples, Tartars, working with them and fighting with them against whomever the enemy was, whether it was the Ottomans or the Austrians or whomever. So the point is that Russia is more cohesive than we are. If you're looking for internal unrest, discontent, divisive forces, you can find those in spades inside American society. But that's not the case in Russia at all.
So when you look at the economy-wise, one may say, yeah, they're doing better today. But even prior to the war, they had a big birth and death problem. I don't know if you've seen the numbers on their birth and death rate. If you want to pull that up, that's not a good look. The closest thing you can compare that to as a case study, they're having more people dying than being born. There's only one other country you can compare this to, and you know who that is. It's one of their allies. It's China. Those guys have the similar issue. India is the complete opposite. And we're not doing that great ourselves, but Russia's not a good place when it comes down to that. But I want to go back to the thought.
Well, wait a minute before you leave.
Yeah.
Putin agrees with you.
Yeah.
And Putin has tried very, very hard to reverse that. First thing he tried to do is to prevent the brain drain. Everybody with any talent or ability had been getting out of Russia since 1992. So he's tried to reverse that. I think he's had some success. He's tried to encourage people to have
how, by the way, if you don't mind, how did he do the first one? I'm curious.
Basically by finding employment for scientists and engineers that otherwise had nowhere to go. He said, oh, we've got to find employment for these people so that we can keep them here. We have to reward them for their talent. I think he's done reasonably well there. When it comes to the rest of the economy, turning around this attitude that why should I bring 2 or 3 children into a world that's dominated by alcoholic men that are destroying themselves and committing suicide has turned out to be pretty tough. I think he's made some progress there. I think this war is going to help him enormously because I think the war is awakening a sense of Russian identity that is far, far stronger and greater than anything we thought existed. All you have to do is talk to the people that are inside Russia and ask Russians what they think. Everybody says, well, they're all afraid of Putin, so they're not going to tell you the truth. That's not true. That's just not true. And we're hearing as exactly what I said. Russia is closer, united more today than I think it has been in at least 30 years or 40 years.
Okay. So
there you go. There's a different perspective that I think is much, much more plausible. And according to what I'm seeing, even people I know from Russia. So my fiance's German, but her family is a mixture of Russian and German. And so they have a lot of family in Russia. And they don't hate Putin at all. In fact, almost all the Russians that I've talked to are pro-Trump and pro-Putin.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting that we're taught that this stream took this little turn because you know this because I told you, but maybe people watching probably don't know. I did a presentation at one of the biggest theological seminary, like academic conferences in Moscow last week. And I wrote a special paper for it. It's my first crack at a real academic paper with all the citations and the abstract and everything. So they loved it. It was really well received. And I appeared by satellite, you know, and they had somebody translating and things like that. But people were asking questions. And I've gotten some feedback from Russians who heard my presentation, which was on the pagan revival that's been going on in Europe and Russia, and how it's connected to feminism in the 21st century and all this sort of stuff. Pretty like, you know, nerdy dweeby stuff, if you will. But what I've heard in talking to a lot of these people is that there's been this identity crisis that's happened since, you know, going back to like the Bolshevik Revolution and the killing of the Tsar, and then the whole Soviet era of removing, I mean, Russia was an Orthodox Christian nation for 800 years, and then they completely stamped that out for the most part, you know, by force. And then once the Soviet system collapsed, nobody really knew, like a lot of people in Russia were kind of left searching for like an identity. Like, are we going to go back to like pre-Christian Russian ethnic pagan stuff? And there is a big revival, and they've got a lot of witchcraft and stuff going on there because of this. And so the Orthodox Church there is trying to recover from this century of being so suppressed and infiltrated and, you know, compromised. And that's a criticism that we get all the time as Orthodox Christians, which may tie in with James Lindsay and some of his criticisms that we're going to talk about too. But they're actually going to take my paper and we're going to do like a more condensed version and put it in some other publications there, just because they feel it's really helpful to there's like an effort to rehabilitate Orthodoxy for the purpose of giving Russians like a national identity that is still Christian and cohesive, and to not have them go back to this weird like ethnic pagan pre-Christian stuff. So that everything that McGregor was saying there is like really consistent with my very limited, you know, but maybe significant talking with Russians who are struggling with this stuff right now. They're, you know, they're living, they're going through it now, and this is what they're relaying to me as well. And that's why they're asking me to write stuff. I mean, why else would you ask me to write things? But here we are, you know. So it sounds to me like he's spot on, and it sounds like the other guy is just repeating Cold War baloney. That it's like, dude, this isn't 1989. What are
I know.
What do you mean? Like
I know.
Well,
Well, that's why I wanted to highlight.
Cosmonauts are still up there banging on stuff with a wrench on the space station, like in the old movies. Like,
that's why I wanted to highlight this stuff, because Peter Zeihan, again, his appearance on Joe Rogan has really catapulted him in his YouTube channel. And like I said, every video gets hundreds of thousands of views.
Yeah.
And he's been a voice that a lot of people have referenced in regards to all these different geopolitical topics. Now, here's one. This is going to conclude our section on Peter Zeihan. But this is his appearance on Joe Rogan, and he talks about, so this person, let's check. He says, let's check Peter Zeihan's record. Politics with Russia and Ukraine, wrong. Crypto going to zero. And we're getting ready to show you the video where he says, Bitcoin's not even going to go to zero. It's going to go to negative. He says, yeah, it's about 16,000. It has about 17,000 more to go in the next few months. Bitcoin becoming negative in value, wrong. Federal Reserve uninterested in a CBDC, wrong. And then leaving X and removing his man bun, bullshit, true. Although he came back, this was the day that he said he was leaving Twitter, which I want to play this right now because he claims that Elon Musk is an apartheid South African. Like, you can't make it up. But this is going to be our last kicks and giggles with Peter Zeihan. Then we're going to get into James Lindsay.
Apartheid. Give me a break.
It was always a hot dumpster fire.
Crypto.
Yeah, it was always a hot dumpster fire.
Always?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that it was all fraud. Some of it was a pyramid scheme. There's never been anything there. It serves no purpose. It's not a store of value. It's not a medium of exchange. And as we have seen, if you want it decentralized and not under government control, it is a haven for fraudsters. And now it is in the process of going to zero, except for Bitcoin, which will probably go negative, because if we're moving into a world with carbon taxes, you have to take into account the energy that it took to produce it in the first place.
What?
Well, that's certainly playing out with like FTX.
Yeah.
Where you're finding out that
There'll be
it's
more.
a house of cards.
Yeah,
Do you feel like that's just sort of opened the door for people to examine all of crypto now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like as soon as you have one of the big ones go down, it's just
And just go down catastrophically within a week.
Yeah, I mean, just there's no intrinsic value to this asset, and now it's starting to be priced appropriately. So it has a, what's Bitcoin at? 16,000. It has another 17,000 to go down.
Duh. Really?
Yeah, there's no intrinsic value to this product.
And do you think that people have just inherently like lost faith in the idea behind crypto because of FTX?
Well, it became an ideology, and whenever you invest based on an ideology, you're going to make some decisions that are a little divorced from math.
And what do you mean by it?
A little rich coming from Peter Zeihan.
I mean, I'm not a cryptocurrency bro or anything, guys. It's not my specialty. But for him to sit here and say crypto has no intrinsic value because it's based on nothing,
yeah,
as opposed to what? Fiat currency, which is based on what?
Well, this is tied to our.
And Joe Rogan's just sitting there going, "Oh yeah," it's like. Nobody's gonna challenge this. You're not gonna.
They're actually, and that's why I want to look up Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter, because there aren't that many criticisms of Peter Zeihan when you search YouTube. There's a few on regards, he gets the U.S. wrong or he gets China wrong, and it's just like a handful of videos. There are not a whole lot of criticism of this guy.
Just foundationally, like I said, I'm not even somebody who's like, I understand like the fundamentals of crypto, and I probably understand the fiat currency system a lot better, but I know like the foundational systems of both. And for him to act like, crypto was just built on a scam, it's like,
yeah, well, not all of it was fraud.
Have you ever heard of fractional reserve banking, sir? Have you ever heard of it? Do you know like what it's based on? It's based on lies, is what it's based on.
Yeah, exactly, in debt. So let's play a little bit more. Now I want to play him talking about how Elon Musk is clearly a anti-Semitic racist and he's an apartheid South African.
People who really like crypto are convinced that it's the currency of the future and that a decentralized ledger is the way to go, and that anything that is controlled by a government entity is by definition a negative, and if it's done by the private sector freely, it will be better. And that's just not how currency works. Currency is a method of exchange and a store of value. And for that, there has to be a degree of trust, and you have to have it managed in terms of volume. And one of the craziest things about Bitcoin is that there will never be more than X number of units of Bitcoin. Well, by default, that means it can't be used for trade, because the whole idea of economic activity is that there's expansion, which means you need more currency to lubricate and manage that expansion. If currency is locked into a specific number, you get monetary inflation, and that is one of the fastest ways to destroy an economic model.
So because of the lack of Bitcoin, because there's a certain controlled number, the only thing that can happen is Bitcoin becomes more expensive.
Right. And that means that the people who hold it are the ones that make the money, but everyone else suffers. I'm sorry, that's not viable. The alternative is you have some private dude out there who generates the coins on a whim. How is that different from the monetary reserve or the monetary authorities that we have at the Federal Reserve, except for the point that there's no accountability? No.
Now, a lot of people have concern that the United...
Okay. Now, here's the last clip I want to share Peter Zeihan. This is the last 34 seconds of his video on why he's leaving Twitter, of which he still posts on Twitter. So it was just like Keith Olbermann. Within 24 hours, he was already back on X platform. But here you go.
Elon Musk himself. What a wanker.
It was one thing when he would blindly parrot whatever piece of Chinese propaganda came across his screen. Another thing when he started doing the same thing for Russian propaganda and then Iranian propaganda. But of late, he's gone down the white supremacist road and the anti-Semitic road. And it's almost like Musk has revealed to the world that in reality, he's not a green or a businessman. He's just an unapologetic apartheid era white South African, which apparently is exactly what he is. And so I'm done. Elon Musk can.
That is so dumb. I don't know where to start with it.
I
And listen,
know.
I'm not an
I
Elon
know.
fangirl. I have criticisms of Elon.
I know.
But
That's
to
what I was
say
going to
he's
do. An
an
open.
apartheid era white South African is absurd.
And that
So-
he's a white supremacist and he's anti-Semitic, and this is why he has to get off the platform X. I mean, it's ridiculous. So again,
Yeah,
if
this
you just
guy-
put in Peter Zeihan and you search on X, you can see one of the reasons why he probably left Twitter or X is because he gets the most heat from there. Now, he has a pretty devout following over on YouTube. And so
Yeah.
most of the comments are actually very positive of him. But again, this was 13 hours ago. So again, still posting on X. This guy says, Peter Zeihan is like a Jehovah's Witness coming to your door, but preaching you to follow the gospel of the State Department policy planning staff.
That's pretty good. I like that one.
I like
Well,
that
I'm
one.
gonna have to dig into this guy a little more because now he's got my attention, and clearly he's a little light in the loafers, you guys. Like after listening to him for this long, like it's pretty obvious I sound masculine in comparison to this guy, and he just does this. He just sounds like an ultra progressive, like outrage nerd, like. This horrible, hopefully Russia will just cease to exist as a country. And any white guy with a bunch of kids is clearly just a white supremacist. It's just like,
well, and that's where
low
he
tier
throws people
nonsense.
off because he criticizes the Biden administration. He criticizes, again, the idea that the idea of globalism, because this is all going to collapse due to demographics, that we need to have more. So he says these things that you think, oh, well, maybe he has a really nuanced perspective because he's not saying exactly what the official narrative, but when you put it all together, it is the official narrative.
Right.
So anyways, guys, smash that like. Feel free to support through Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. We don't have any YouTube super chats yet. But now we're going to move into what everybody's been waiting for, and that is Mr. James Lindsay. Oh, let's go back. Okay. So James Lindsay, I'm sure all of you guys are aware, I laid out, he became more popular for his grievance studies affair with Peter Boghossian and Helen Pluckrose, which again, I support. And so as we go through this stuff, maybe we can highlight some of the things that we support and agree with James Lindsay, because there's quite a bit. The point that we're going to be making today is that the worldview that he promotes in opposition to cultural Marxism, critical theory, radical progressivism is the Enlightenment and classical liberalism, which actually gave rise to all this stuff. And if anything, his criticisms of critical theory and cultural Marxism are trying to fulfill the ideals of the Enlightenment.
Yes.
So he again was prominent on the Washington, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, all this different stuff. What I found really interesting, he's also very, very critical of Christian nationalism, but Lindsay is a co-founder of the website New Discourses, which is owned by Christian nationalist commentator Michael O'Fallon, which I don't know who he is.
I didn't know that.
But it's
But
very
that's
interesting. He's always railing against Christian nationalism, and yet his own website and the organization he's a part of, it's in fact owned by one. Very, very weird.
We'll have to check who Michael O'Fallon is, because people are often called Christian nationalists when they are not. In fact, James Lindsay himself, I've heard him referred to as a Christian nationalist.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Like,
well, and
so
that's where you can,
that guy's not, but I'll look into that.
And you can see I clicked on it, and we don't need to look into it, but I mean, it's horrendous the way they describe it. So it's a radical right-wing white supremacist movement in Western countries, basically, is how they frame it.
Yes.
But he's a lifelong
cover.
He's a lifelong Democrat, voted and volunteered for Barack Obama. He's part of the New Atheism movement. He's self-identified with the left, and he basically believes that the left and atheism plus has moved further away from him. He hasn't changed, but they have changed, sort of like the Bill Maher rhetoric and framework. Now, he's labeled with the conspiracy theory promotion, is that he is a promoter of the right-wing LGBT grooming conspiracy theory that has been credited as one of the several public figures responsible for popularizing groomer as a slur directed at LGBTQ educators and activists by members of the political right. Lindsay has referred as the pride flag as the flag of a hostile enemy. And then they say in 2021, Lindsay wrote on Twitter that there will be a genocide of whites if critical race theory isn't stopped. His statement was met with widespread criticism, including the founder of libertarian anti-identity politics magazine, Claire Lemon, who wrote, James Lindsay is now peddling white genocide theory, implying that a genocide against whites in the U.S. is imminent, has the potential to inspire racist violence. Such as comments are extreme, reckless, and irresponsible. They should be denounced.
It might be worth noting here that this might be another source of his beef with Jordan Peterson and Peterson associated people, because Claire Lehman is a good buddy of Jordan Peterson.
Oh, okay.
So
and I know when the coup came out, she was very strict in her abidance to the policies that are laid forth. And she, I believe, is in Australia. So she was in one of the worst countries. And then it says Lindsay has promoted the far right cultural Marxism conspiracy theory. Okay. Right. So interesting stuff there.
Which cultural Marxism is not a conspiracy theory. I don't know how they get away with calling it that. It's very clearly and obviously a real, actual thing. It's not, I mean, a lot of what I do is based on reading the writings of people who are cultural Marxists and describe themselves as such. So it's wild to me when they come out and say this is a conspiracy theory, when I'm like, really? Because I'm reading intersectional feminist literature and they're telling me that they are cultural Marxists and they identify as cultural Marxists. So if it's a conspiracy theory, you better tell them.
Right. Exactly. Anyway. Thank you to Thomas O'Brien, becomes a COTEL Crew member here on YouTube. God bless you, brother. Appreciate the support. Enjoy all your emojis. Can we get some atheist fedora hats in the chat, guys? I mean, now we're getting into the new atheism. You know, maybe before we get into James Lindsay's stuff, because we're going to play so he can put his worldview in his words. What are some of the things that you agree with James on?
Oh, so, I mean, we both strongly dislike feminism. We both agree that it has a lot of roots in Marxism and in Gnosticism. I think he's right on both of those. However, I think he goes wrong in a lot of places with not knowing the full history of this, and that there's two sides of it, which is why it's probably why he's so annoyed with me, because I see all the time, like dozens of times on Instagram, on Twitter, pretty much anywhere he is, people are tagging me. It's the only reason I know so much about what he's doing is because every time he talks, somebody tags me and goes, you need to talk to Rachel Wilson, you need to read her book. And I even DM'd him and I was like, hey, everybody keeps tagging me. I'm happy to send you a free copy if you want to read it. And he was just like, no, thanks, not interested. And I was like, all right, that's fine. And, you know, he's probably super busy and maybe he doesn't want to read my stupid book. That's totally fine. But it's a part of where he comes at from everything. So he thinks, and this is a really common misconception, which is why I'm glad we're talking about this. He thinks the Enlightenment was good, that it freed humanity from superstition and mysticism and these crazy backward, superstitious beliefs that held humanity back until the age of reason came along and liberated everybody from that. And he thinks that was good and it was humming along as intended until the Marxists came and ruined it. And the Marxists and the postmodernists came along and kind of trampled over his good liberalism. And now everybody unfairly associates his good liberalism with modern, postmodern progressivism. And he equates it to a mind virus, which I agree with. He says that it has saturated the institutions, which I agree with. So like, again, a lot of agreement, but he thinks what we need to do is just walk back the Marxist stuff and go back to the original good Enlightenment and be better at defending it. And he thinks this is another thing I agree with him on, because everybody on the right, especially like 2 years ago when I got on Tucker Carlson, everybody was saying, Rachel, you need to back us because we need to build alternative systems. We need to build alternative institutions. And like Andrew Torba, who's a wonderful man, the guy who owns Gab, really was heavy into this. And I said, there's just a problem, you guys. You can't just build new institutions, because the first thing that'll happen is they'll get captured. If you guys saw my episode with Jay on institutional capture, we can build all the alternative systems we want. It's just going to be infiltrated and taken over again by the same people. James Lindsay says this all the time. So that's another point I agree with him on. So I agree with him on a ton of stuff, but maybe you want me to leave it there for now on where I
we
agree.
can address some as we go through. And I wanted to give some context for people. If we keep talking about the Enlightenment, what is the Enlightenment?
Yeah.
The Enlightenment is a 17th and 18th century intellectual movement concerned with human happiness, the pursuit of knowledge by reason and reason alone, or the senses, so through induction, empiricism, with ideals regarding natural law, personal liberty, the idea of progress, both social and individual, equality, toleration amongst a variety of different belief systems, fraternity, and secularism. So these ideas are essential to what the Enlightenment is. This was the break in regards to the sort of Christian Europe that you typically would think about with Catholicism and all this type of stuff. So, oh, thank you so much. Thomas O'Brien just gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate that. Welcome your favorite sociologists, Blue Skittle, Cup of Coffee, Draven Williams, Fluoride Junkie, and Silver-Tongued Cavalier. And Silver-Tongued Cavalier threw in $2. Thank you so much, bro. He says, read the Manifesto Foundationalism by Haywood. Yeah, I'll check that out. Thank you very much, Silver-Tongued Cavalier, for the support, brother. Really appreciate that. So the Enlightenment then was preceded by what's referred to as the Scientific Revolution. And this is led by people like Francis Bacon, John Locke, Isaac Newton, which is really ironic because, as we'll get through today, James Lindsay criticizes the idea of mysticism and magic. Anybody who's familiar then with Isaac Newton knows that he himself was an alchemist and his science was fused with magical and spiritual understandings. The end point of the Enlightenment is a debated topic among scholars. Often it's referred to in regard to the French Revolution. So this is in 1780 something. We get the French Revolution. Some highlight Kant. So Immanuel Kant, in his Critique of Pure Reason, as I said, was a major turn in philosophy because he demonstrated that the presuppositions of both, as I said, Baconian empiricism and Cartesian rationalism presupposed Christian metaphysics. And so what Kant does in his Critique of Pure Reason says, actually, neither one of you guys, based on your own premises, can actually presuppose those things. And therefore, he calls into question the idea that we can just totally use reason, because if you just use reason, you actually don't know if the thing that you're observing is the thing in and of itself. This is the synthetic relationships between the a priori categories that Kant argues are in our head and the impression of the sense world, and that in that impression, that is actually the world that we experience. So this calls in question Baconian empiricism, and that does science actually know the world out there? He says no. And then Descartes, the idea that you can just like close your eyes and come to rational philosophies using many aspects of Platonic universals and metaphysics, he says you can't do that either. And that's why then there's a major turn in philosophy in the questioning of knowability, which culminates then in the mid 20th century with postmodernism, because they just throw their hands up and say, well, I guess we can't really know anything for sure. And therefore, everybody is entitled to their own truth.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Bruce Roberts, for the $10 super chat. He says, you constantly putting out proper content. Love your work. Well, thank you very much, Bruce Roberts. I appreciate you for the support. Thank you, and God bless. So individual liberty, religious tolerance was elevated above absolute monarchy and religious authority. These were the enemies of the Enlightenment. Okay.
Yes.
And this is going to make sense why then James Lindsay, as a pro-Enlightenment thinker, is so critical and demonstrable when he describes Orthodoxy or traditional Christianity. So the philosophy of the Enlightenment, as I said, there's two strands: Baconian empiricism, Cartesian rationalism. Kant undermines that. And then you have the radical Enlightenment, which is characterized by the work of Spinoza, and that he advocates for liberal democracy, individual liberty, freedom of expression, and eradicating all religious authorities. This is considered the strand of the radical Enlightenment, which then was responded by what's referred to as the counter Enlightenment, with people like Giambattista Vico and his The New Science. He was an Italian thinker. Edmund Burke is the British counter Enlightenment figure that a lot of people know about. That he's sort of the father of what's referred to as conservatism as an ideology. That comes from Edmund Burke. And so they were critical of the belief in progress without God. And they were critical of unfettered rationality, which, again, are both promoted by the Enlightenment. And they were critical of liberal democracy and secularism. Okay, so the counter-Enlightenment was responding to the Enlightenment by saying, actually, you know, we're very skeptical of all these ideals that you guys have.
Yeah.
And so LGBTQ, feminism, and the Enlightenment, we see Thomas Cannon in 1746 give the first defense of homosexuality. So again, the promotion of some of the things that James Lindsay is fighting actually get going in the Enlightenment.
Yes.
Jeremy Bentham is the founder of utilitarianism. Now, I don't know if James Lindsay is a utilitarian. He might be, but the founder of utilitarianism actually wrote the first argument for the legalization of homosexuality.
Yes.
And that was also, I believe, in the 1770s. And then the French Revolution in after the French Revolution in 1791, it was the first nation to legalize homosexuality. So just highlighting that to give perspectives on how the Enlightenment is actually tied to things that we're seeing today in the rhetoric. So that should give everybody at least a perspective on what exactly we're talking about.
Yeah. And to add to that, in the work that I do, so my first book really focused heavily on the roots of feminism in the Western liberal sphere. It's what happened in England, America, Canada, and Australia, kind of the Western world for the most part, all happened roughly on the same timeline, with people who were all in correspondence with each other and the same people funding and promoting everything. Well, my next book, which is huge and taking forever, has to do with the other side of feminism. Now, in the Enlightenment, this is where we get the right-left dialectic. This is where we get, it comes out of the French Revolution, the right and left side of the court where
Right.
these Enlightenment revolutionaries would meet and talk about things. So I think Lindsay is, I'm supposing somewhat, because he doesn't want to chat about this. Maybe someday he will, but from what I gather, he feels that, you know, the proper liberal Enlightenment thinkers were the anti-authoritarian ones, the ones who were against religious authority and magic and mysticism and fascism and these sorts of things, and that it's the left side that took things too far, and it's the Marxists because they want centralized control and they want to take away freedom and this and that. So to boil all of this down, what all of the classical liberal, Enlightenment liberal, libertarian, all of these these ideologies that come out of this, they always boil down to, I want unlimited freedom to coom. I want unlimited, you know, who are you to tell me that my gay lifestyle is immoral or that living with my girlfriend is immoral? Anything like that, right?
Right.
But where Lindsay and a lot of these people, like the neocons, the new liberals, all of these people who are saying, I'm liberal, but it went too far. What they're saying, the crux of their whole worldview is, I don't like the destabilization that Marxism brings. And I don't like the authoritarianism, because then I might be stuck in another situation where my freedom to coom is infringed upon. And I don't like that. And what they really want, and all they're concerned with at the end of the day, when you really boil it down, and they'd be mad to hear me say this, but it's true. They want a nice, neat, orderly, predictable world in which they can have unlimited cooming. Okay. Like this is, if you just wipe away all the other garbage and nonsense they try to tell you they believe, it's about, yes, we want unlimited personal freedom to, I want to be able to smoke pot. I want to be able to have homosexual, encounters. I want to do all sorts of things that the Christians or the religious people or
Right.
those people don't like. But I also don't want the economic destabilization and the poverty and all of the bad stuff that comes with like the Marxist side of things. So they want the Christian structure, right? And this is why James Lindsay pays lip service to Christianity, but also will say, I hate the mysticism and the magic and he's wrong about all that. But the reason he'll say he likes Christianity is because Christianity has a universal system of morality that lends predictability and structure, and it makes for a nice, predictable world. It makes for a nice, polite society where you can walk down the street in safety. You can go and have your cup of coffee at the little, place out on the street, and everything is peaceful, and the economics are good, right? It creates this nice, orderly world in which these people can be degenerate and do what they want to do. Okay, so they like that part of it, but they don't want the Bolshevism side of it, which results in Black Lives Matter riots and trans kindergarten teachers and the chaotic stuff. He doesn't like that, right? Because he wants this nice, thriving first world kind of place in which to coom. So I think that's the Rachel version of where these philosophies differ. And what I was trying to get through to him is that you are trying to do what everyone does and pick from the political and spiritual buffet the little parts that you like and smash them together.
Right.
And you're presupposing that you can do this. You're presupposing that you can say what, like most atheists do whenever Andrew talks to them about, their moral views. Well, I like Christian morality in as much as it keeps society safe and nice and predictable and clean for me. I like that. But I don't like it when they say, I have to have duty and responsibility and that there's certain things that are just not negotiable because they're wrong. I don't like the authority. Who are you to tell me, right? They always say, who are you to tell me that I can't do blah, blah. Why can't I have a boyfriend? This kind of thing. Who are you to say I can't be gay? So they want to pick. They like certain things about Christianity and they want to keep those things, but they want to get rid of all the foundations and the presuppositions that make that universal morality work.
Right.
And I was trying to say to him, I said, you, sir, Mr. Lindsay, are a huge fan of egalitarianism.
Right.
And it's the basis for feminism. You can't escape it. You can't say feminism is bad and the trans stuff is bad, but I'm an egalitarian. And they'll try to say, well, but now we can say all people should be equal before the law. That's not the same thing as saying that people are created the same. I know that some people are smarter and some people are taller, and so they once again try to pick things. And what it all comes down to is, look, and I've heard him say this in a video where he was talking to Sargon of Akkad. He came out and said, well, people will try to criticize me and say, but the Enlightenment led to all these things. And I'm saying it didn't have to, right? If we just were better at defending the institutions from the Marxists, then we would have, he thinks we would have just kind of stayed in this nice, it reminds me of the Amish, right? Everything was perfect in like 1865 or like for James Lindsay, it's a little further back because this is his other big thing. When you were just talking about how Isaac Newton was Christian, but there was a lot of like mysticism in his science. Lindsay has said this in that same conversation. He says, if I look at some of these early scientists, they were Gnostics or they were Christians or they were mystics and they were also philosophers. None of them were like pure empiricists. And he thinks that's the problem. He thinks that the Enlightenment was good, but they didn't have all the science we have. They didn't have all the technology we have. So now we just need to refine those ideas to get the mystical or the when he says mysticism, I wonder if he's not just trying to say metaphysical.
Right.
Because he seems to be an empiricist. He seems
I
to be a materialist.
Yeah, I wonder if he even thinks in regards to these philosophical categories, because he assumes so much that maybe he doesn't even think about the presuppositional metaphysical basis for what he actually believes in. And as a classical liberal, the three ideals of liberalism is liberty, egalitarianism, and fraternity. And
Yeah, I
so
said that
those
to
are
him right in the
essential
tweet.
to what liberalism is. And I want to give a shout out to AC because he makes a really important point that the Rosicrucian Enlightenment calls the Enlightenment. And there's a great, great book by Francis Yates called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. And I reference it and read from aspects of it in my stream on the Ultimate Overview of Rosicrucianism, that the 1600s was a huge time in which these sort of magical, mystical worldviews were being coincided and combined with science as a method to uncover the mysteries of creation. And this was tinted with a theological perspective. And so AC is absolutely right that if you want to know more about the sort of magical Rosicrucian underlings of the Enlightenment, read Francis A. Yates' The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. So I just wanted to give them a shout out. But so moving in then to James Lindsay, this was one of his more popular videos. I was looking at his channel. His channel is New Discourses. It has 159,000 subscribers. And he's talking about how the truth about critical methods, of which I agree with everything that he's talking about. It's just once he gets to liberalism, social engineering, which I'm going to start it right here, he starts talking about what their goals are and how they're destroying true liberalism. And so I want you to hear his words describing his worldview and what he believes, the things he's fighting against and what he's trying to protect.
Scholarship in mathematics education assumes we will work within the given system or expand what we...
Sorry, I always speed things up when I watch them. Okay, let's slow it down.
Currently count as the status quo. Within mathematics education, we have convinced ourselves that equity is a strong enough agenda when maybe revolution should be our goal. What I'm trying to tell you today is that revolution is their goal.
True. But that's exactly the goal of the Enlightenment as well. And anybody who's not familiar, I highly recommend you read this book right here.
Yeah.
It's by James Billington, The Fire in the Minds of Men, in which he describes the consistency of revolutionary thinking, tying it to occult societies, Masonic lodges, the Enlightenment, and how it relates to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. So if you're not familiar, read this book, because I don't think James is familiar with this particular book, but I wanted to give you guys that who are followers here. Okay, back to it.
Now, if you will take a moment and take in our surroundings. We're in the National Liberal Club in the Gladstone Library, among the greatest bastions for liberalism in the world, where a flag for liberalism was planted. Liberalism is concerned with freedom. Liberalism believes in the individual and his or her dignity, that people should be judged by the contents of their character because that's really what determines who they are. Liberalism believes in the universal, that there are unalienable rights attached to what it means to be human.
And so I ask James, on what metaphysical basis are rights afforded to all humans in all places? Because based on some of the constitutional literature regarding the Enlightenment, rights are afforded to you through the government. And of course, all governments are different. Now, the way he's framing it is the ideal that, again, humanity has a unique ontology and therefore is afforded these rights. This is where, at least in the American framework, they said, all right, they're God-given rights, right? That wasn't the case in the French Revolution. But that's my point to him is, okay, well, you're just assuming that there's this universal dignity and that humanity is universally afforded these universal rights. You as a secular materialist don't have any basis to actually make that claim.
Yeah, and to not even presup him, we should and we will. But even aside from that, because everyone gets annoyed, all these ortho bros just want to presup everybody. But it's the reason we do that. He just said liberalism is concerned with freedom, content of character over color of skin, Martin Luther King reference, and then universal human rights. And this is why I said he likes to pick and choose the Christian moral framework, because ours is the only universal moral framework. Now, you guys
Made in the
probably
image
all
of God.
saw, yeah, well, if you guys saw Andrew's kerfuffle, his little debate with Matt Dillahunty, and you've heard Andy talk about rights, it raises a lot of eyebrows, because you don't hear Americans often challenge this preconceived notion of human rights and where they come from. And what has happened is, like, this is one area where Dillahunty and James Lindsay would agree, and this is what atheists love to do. They go, we like the universal morality of Christianity, but we can do it without the God part. This is
Right.
what Dillahunty asserts. This is what Lindsay asserts. We can take this Christian universal morality that all human beings, like you said, are, we would say, made in the image of God. They just say made in the image of good. The good is the good. We just think it's good. It's more good. And they can't tell you what's good, except, they'll try to do the utilitarian framework, but there's lots of holes in that, so they don't
Lots of
like that.
holes.
So they try to adopt this universal morality and this idea that human beings and human life is worth something and has purpose, but they want to just take the God part out of it.
Right.
And all Andrew's ever trying to do is tell them, you can't. It's inextricable. You can't do it that way. It's going to necessarily fall flat on its face, and he'll just crush people in a couple of paragraphs with that. And so already in this video, James is appealing to universal human rights. And it's like, based on what? If you're an atheist, based on what? Preference. It will ultimately come down to, I just prefer for all humans to have rights.
Right.
So.
Exactly. And even without precepting him, just based on his own epistemology as a secular materialist, and this is the argument that Andrew made at Dillahunty, is on what basis can you say that I'm wrong if I deny what you believe to be the good? You have no basis.
Well, and that's what I was fighting with James on Twitter about. I said, you have no basis from which to criticize the trans movement or feminists or any of this stuff, because you believe in, like he just said, freedom and universal human rights. And he would say, well, I think those people are trying to infringe on those things. But yeah, you think that, but they will just counter you and say, no, you're the one wanting to limit that. Who are you to limit our trans rights? Trans rights are human rights. Isn't that what they say? So if you don't know what the human rights are based on, and I said this to James on Twitter, I said, maybe you're the first person who can tell me where we're going to extract the source of universal human rights, if not from God. If it's not that, if it's not Christian, where are you getting this from? Please tell me how you're going to say all human beings have rights, except for, I think the trans people are wrong about it, or the feminist people are wrong about women's rights. You're trying, it's like when Protestants try to criticize each other. It's like, it's when Protestants try to say, no, those Protestants are wrong. And it's like, well, if you believe in sola scriptura, then you're all in the same boat.
Exactly.
It's the same thing.
Exactly. It's a ad hoc justification for, again, whatever the ideals he claims for, because there's really no foundation to it. All right, continuing on here, letting James speak for himself. We're going to play just a few minutes, and then we're going to then get into more in regards to Paggio, Rachel, the ortho bro beef, and all that stuff. So hang on with me.
Liberalism accepts the objective that there is a reality out there and we can know something about it. Liberalism, although you probably haven't heard it put this way before, is a system of conflict management that allows advanced society to exist. It works by guaranteeing freedoms to speak or not, to worship or not, to make use of one's property as one will, to disagree or not, to think for oneself as one will. Liberalism as a set of systems built the modern world over the last 5 centuries. And with it came the lowest infant mortality rates, the lowest poverty rates, the greatest access to health, travel, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that the world has ever seen. Rooms like this one, the one we are in now, were built to promote and defend this system. So welcome. That's why we're here. That's why this conference was held here. So we have to ask ourselves, why do we need to defend liberalism? Because liberalism, for all of its resilience, is also fragile, as all the early liberals knew, like the critical theorists also realized. The critical theorists in the Frankfurt School and since didn't and don't trust liberalism. They were faltering Marxists who were already disillusioned with capitalism and who were becoming increasingly disillusioned with a society that seems to like it. For them, the problem was that liberalism lets people make their own choices. And of course, people can't be trusted.
Now, again, in response to this, I went and found, this is the Dialectic of the Enlightenment. This is a critical theorist highlighting, again, Horkheimer and Adorno, the two critical theorists that he just highlighted from the Frankfurt School. And I want to, here's the Enlightenment as a theory comprises 5 central tenets. And you tell me if you don't actually think that the critical theorists and some of their criticisms of the Enlightenment actually have a point. So they highlight that there's 5, again, they argue there's 5 central tenets of the Enlightenment: commitment to certain ideals, autonomy, individuality, no coercion, human happiness, and so on. Number 2, commitment to the view that genuine knowledge is knowledge that is an objectifying based on a clear and strict separation between the human subject and nature as objective knowledge. Again, this is what Kant undermines, where some scholars claim that's where the Enlightenment ends. So objectivity. Number 3 is the commitment to the view that an increase in genuine knowledge in a society would lead to a greater realization of the ideals of the Enlightenment. Number 4, commitment to a principle of universal criticism. That is nothing to be taken on faith or authority or because of a tradition, but every belief must show a warrant that will be recognized by the tribunal of reason. And number 5, commitment to seeing itself, that is to seeing enlightenment as absolutely different from and opposed to barbarism and myth. Now, you scroll down here, here's some really interesting criticism. So in regards to number 3, the line of criticism is that the Enlightenment has an inherent tendency to destroy itself. This is the critical theorist, guys. This is the Frankfurt School, the dreaded Frankfurt School. The original substantive ideas of the Enlightenment, autonomy, individuality, and so on, are not themselves exempt from the demands of the principle of universal criticism. That is, from the requirement of giving an account of themselves before the tribunal of reason. It becomes increasingly clear, however, that it is not possible to argue for the results of empirical science or from some more general principles of instrumental reason, that is, from the same bit of what the Enlightenment itself would consider genuine knowledge, to the validity of those ideals, right? You can't actually rationally prove the ideals of the Enlightenment itself. Again, this is the critical theorist presupping the Enlightenment. Number 4, the history of the 20th century has shown that an increase in technical control over the world and the spread of scientific knowledge does not, in fact, necessarily make people more autonomous or more highly individuated or more happy. True.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
I like the shout out to the Marquis de Sade up there too, and calling him a legitimate child of the Enlightenment. That's perfect. And that was exactly true. It goes back to, and you'll notice James Lindsay, just when you pause the video, he just got done saying, why do we love liberalism? He gave his little pitch for it because it creates, I'll just paraphrase, it creates a wonderful, nice cooming environment for me. It creates this wonderful, like, materially nice, like, we have a high standard of living, we have all this technology, we have lots of food, we have energy. He said liberalism gives me a very nice cooming environment in which I can comfortably coom without anyone infringing on my cooming. Is what he said. And then, we're looking at the criticism right now, and it mentions Marquis de Sade, and he was another guy that was like, hey, this is great. It's the same thing. I just want unlimited freedom to coom. It's never about anyone's duty or responsibility to everyone else. It's always about
right.
what can I do uninhibited?
Right.
What can I get away with uninhibited? So.
And pulling that back up, so like you were saying, so the Marquis de Sade, a legitimate child of the Enlightenment, finds no rational arguments against cruelty, which is true. Based on Enlightenment principles, how can you argue against being cruel to a certain people, let's say terrorists,
yes.
let's say, whoever your enemy is? Because you can give a rational argument for why you should be cruel.
Right.
So again, and this is the critical theorist. They're totally undermining the Enlightenment. And then the final criticism starts with the rigidity and paranoia of the Enlightenment project from its need to encompass everything in a single definitive closed system of concepts, which is exactly what broke down and has led to postmodernism, because they try to create an entire system a la Hegel without, again, due through the utilization of pure reason. But again, it presupposes all these things, and therefore a universal closed system always falls apart. This means that Enlightenment is potentially totalitarian and has an inherent tendency to absolutize itself. That is, falsely to declare itself to not be not just a given historically relative stage in the global process of enlightenment, but rather the final and definitive form of the Enlightenment. And thus, absolutizing itself and resisting change, the given stage of the Enlightenment turns itself into a form of myth. This transformation is the final stage of the dialectic of enlightenment. So again, they're using critical Marxist dialectical theory to undermine it. And I'm not here to argue for the critical theorists. My point is to say that I'm against their project as well, but they are giving legitimate criticisms to the Enlightenment and the liberalism that Lindsay's promoting.
Yes, exactly. And when Lindsay said liberalism is a system of conflict management, this is where I think the fundamental disagreement between me and him is, because I see the Enlightenment as the literal source. I mean, look at the 20th century and the massive 2 world wars, Bolshevik Revolution, Maoist China. You look at the atrocities of the 20th century, all enabled by the Enlightenment, and it does not manage conflict. It creates perpetual revolution. It creates perpetual conflict, because when you try to conceptualize each person is his own king, each person has their own autonomy, they do what they want, they pursue their happiness. I don't infringe on your rights, you don't infringe on my rights. It sounds really good until you live in the real world and see that there's always going to be people who do not have an altruistic or moral grounding. And if you can't give them that, they will not only trample on your rights, they will say, well, your whole philosophy here says that I can do what makes me happy. And if what makes me happy is getting rid of you, there's no reason I shouldn't do that. If what makes me happy is taking over this country, burning down building, there's no, like it just said in the
he would probably argue, well, that harms other people. So again, that's where the libertarianism comes in. Well, now you're infringing on private property and all these different things.
Yeah, and then the argument is, okay, what's harm? Because again, they're presupposing that we all agree on what's harmful.
Yeah, do you want to build exactly? Would James Lindsay burn down a critical theorist think tank building if he could? I mean, because that would violate his Enlightenment ideals.
This is why he gets huffy and frustrated and just starts making fun of people rather than working through this
he
problem.
Only makes fun of people. Yeah. And maybe the guy, just to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe as a mathematician, he just doesn't know that much about philosophy. And maybe he has began his worldview in this investigation post his mathematics career to just focusing on critical theory and cultural Marxism and this stuff. And he just has no idea about intellectual history and how thought and philosophy has progressed over the centuries.
Yeah, because I mean, when I'm arguing people on this and we talk about harm, I'm like, they're like, well, they'll say trans people should be able to do this because it makes them happy and pursuit of happiness, which is what James just argued. And I'm like, yeah, but heroin addicts think heroin makes them happy. Should we give it to them then?
Right. And that would be something that would be tough for the Enlightenment, the liberals, because where do you fall down in that?
Yeah, they would say, well, the heroin addict is only harming himself. And it's like, but we see after 200 years of this experiment that that's not true. That if everybody just cooms and shoots up heroin, society falls apart right away. There has to be, along with this concept of rights, there has to be a concept of duty and responsibility to go with it. And only the Christian framework can give you that. James cannot tell us what our duties and our responsibilities ought to be. He can't give us oughts other than based on his preference of, I just want a clean, nicely organized society where everything runs well so that I can do whatever the hell I want.
Right, exactly. Storm the Cat throws in $5. Thank you very much, brother. He says, I noticed that he talks about this building they're in like it's a sacred temple, like a church, even though he doesn't believe in mysticism and spirituality. Great point. great point. And I think this is where I would agree with the critical theorists, is that the Enlightenment itself is a sort of a myth. And that it's a
kind of
it's
a
a myth.
it's a secular religion. It's the when Andrew argued this, he said, look, secular humanism is just the atheist liberal religion. You guys need a religion because your worldview doesn't inform it. You can't make ought claims. You can't make them. So you have to create like your own pseudo religious system.
Right. Exactly. Guys, smash that like. And if you want to show some love, send in a super chat using the Dono chat link or Streamlabs or YouTube. Any of those would be greatly appreciated. Okay, we're going to play just a couple more minutes of James giving his worldview, and then we're going to start getting into some of the recent drama.
To choose the right things. At the time, they were concerned with people choosing fascism, so maybe that's fair enough. It wasn't just them, however. Critical theorists in the postmodern line, Helen just spoke about, they gained prominence from the 1960s to the 1980s. They patronized us with other worries about the free choices of everyday people. Just like their forebears in the Frankfurt School, they worried that most people choose badly, largely including by not choosing art and poetry and other vestiges of high culture when given the choice. They said that people can't choose the right way because they're fed a steady diet of false consumer goods and images. Jean Baudrillard was particularly concerned with this. Others, like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida, worried that our means of gathering knowledge and communicating it were little more than instruments of power that create injustice. Their solution was that knowledge and language needed to be deconstructed for our own emancipation. Critical theorists since agree with this, but have realized they must also reconstruct society according to social justice designs. And critical theorists have been cited more than any other type of scholar in history. Citation counts tell us something about a scholar's influence. Top scholars in many fields get a few tens of thousands citations over their career. Nearly all of the foundational critical theorists have either tens or hundreds of thousands of citations. Michel Foucault alone has the most. He's been cited over 900,000 times, according to Google Scholar. So critical ideas have been very influential, very widespread. And what do? Over and over again, they use what they call criticism to tear down liberalism and freedom, the freedom to speak, to think, to choose as we will, and to be the arbiters of our own lives, which they believe is a myth.
Okay, so that gives you a framework for James Lindsay's worldview and James Lindsay's perspective. Now, what has happened recently on Twitter? Because that's where I want to go next. And so we have a video that we're going to look is Paul Vanderklay actually discusses Rachel and James's back and forth. He gives some fairly critical words towards the ortho bros, as they're just Americans looking for the new shiny ancient thing. But we're going to come to this after you sort of get caught up on all the e-drama. So this is
the
James
Dutch Calvinists are going to crap all over me, and I'm sad because that was, that's how I was raised. I love you, Dutch Calvinists, but you're so wrong. You're just so incredibly wrong. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
He kind of mocks you as like, oh yeah, she's got all the symbols of. Well, you'll see it. You'll see it again. Rachel didn't even know. I asked her if she knew about it before the stream. She's like, no, and I was like, okay, well, we're gonna watch it.
I was like, I can react live. It'll be great.
So James Lindsay, you see, he changed his name, James Lindsay Against Magic. He equates orthodoxy with magic. And he says, I don't know who needs to hear this, but mysticism and magic rituals are definitely not based. As if he knows anything, what the based movement is. Anyways.
Orthodoxy is the literal antithesis of magic.
Yes, exactly. Well, and that's
the actual antidote. It's the antidote to magic. And the wizardry, when he talks about wizardry and magic, the reason a lot of people come to orthodoxy after being in the occult is because it is the actual antidote to that stuff. Just saying.
Right. So so this is where things got going. So Jonathan Paggio, James Lindsay was doing his stuff, And like Rachel said, he had been kind of saying really fallacious things about Christianity over the last year and a half, but I let it go because, in regards to the bigger scheme of things, I think he does some good work. Well, Jonathan Pageau posted Rockabye Locke. Remember John Locke, essential thinker of the Enlightenment, on the treetop. When the wind blows, the Enlightenment will rock. When the bough breaks, the Enlightenment will fall, and down will come freedom, the Enlightenment, and all. And James Lindsay was upset with this and left a comment, scratch a hippie, find a fascist every time, insinuating that Jonathan Pageau is a hippie fascist. What? And so Pageau says, you're out of control, James, and moving into ad hominem is not a good look. Saying reason is not sufficient to uphold civilization, true, does not make
Shout
me
out
either a hippie
AC.
or a fascist. Yeah, and there's
AC is in
AC. AC's in the responses. Conceptual James, while glad your work and the ability to pill normies and social alliance against Gnosticism, we will listen to our saints on this. They are right and speak with more authority than you will ever have. Liberalism empowered Gnosticism. And so this led back and forth to an exchange. Let me see if it's in this one. With even Jay Dyer got into it and said, hey, I'd be willing to have a conversation or do a public discussion on this. James Lindsay said, no, he's not interested in talking to Orthodox people. He's not interested in discussing these ideals whatsoever. And so it must have been in a different one. So Pageau posted it again. This was after everything blew up. He says, so let's post this again. When someone tells you the Enlightenment thinkers they don't like our counter-enlightenment, they are coping for the simple fact that reason is not sufficient, which is why the Enlightenment contains both sides, a reason side and a magic side. It is both sides of Newton, his scientific and alchemical side. It is both sides of Descartes, the cogito side, and his affiliations with Rosicrucians. Occultism and 18th century secret societies like Freemasonry are the mystical side of the Enlightenment. All true, which is why they permeate the revolutions and are found so prominently among the founding fathers. The modern world, and especially America, cannot be understood without seeing these two aspects as two sides of a single coin. True. And what do we get? James Lindsay comes down here and calls Jonathan Pageau a con artist. You're a con artist.
How?
How? He just like says mean names to people. That's
I know.
all he does.
He doesn't want to work through this problem. And like I said, in his talk with Sargon, he was saying the rational empiricist part and the moral part, I like the moral framework of Christianity, and the Enlightenment was good. It's just that they weren't technologically advanced enough. So now that we are, it's our duty to take the mystical side out. He thinks we can just deduce it down to, apparently he thinks this. I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but based on what he does say, it sounds like he wants to take the irrational part out of the Enlightenment and leave just the rational part, and somehow that will leave us with this like neatly organized society where everybody just where liberty is obvious and morality is obvious and right or wrong, these are all just obvious things. He just wants to, like all liberals, he wants to presuppose a starting point and just insist upon it. He goes, this is my axiom and we're starting here. And it's like, yeah, but you can't do that. You can't just insist and then everyone will go along. It's not how things work.
Exactly. So moving on here, and you see how James Lindsay describes himself as pro-America, anti-communist, base AF, three American flags. And that's where the self-grandizement is so annoying with him. But here is the beginning of your conversations with him. Are these in numerical order or chronological order?
I think they're mostly. It was tough because we both tweet way too much. So it was just like rapid fire. It was so fast, and I was just screenshotting them as I go, because every time I get in a Twitter fight with people, they go and delete all this stuff and act like it didn't happen. So I have to keep receipts now. But so it's mostly, I think it's enough in order that it'll make sense.
So something regarding I suspect you don't. I'm not sure.
He said, I don't know what liberalism is.
Oh, yeah.
And I said,
okay.
yeah, I do. And he said, I suspect you don't. So
And you said, I agree with you on all the problems of feminism. However, you seem to fail to notice that Enlightenment liberalism is what made it possible for feminism to become the dominant socio-political narrative. Egalitarianism is a pillar of the Enlightenment, is it not? Good question. And that's a yes or no response. And so I guess this alpha lib says liberalism and feminism are not the same thing. Fun fact, women ran a majority of the taverns in early America. And you said you didn't respond to the question I posed. Egalitarianism is a pillar of the Enlightenment, is it not? Is it not the fundamental basis for liberalism itself? Yes. Liberty, egalitarianism, fraternity. Those are the three pillars of
Liberty,
classical
equality,
liberalism.
fraternity. Yeah. And I said that. I was like, if he was around during the French Revolution, he'd have been arm in arm with them yelling, liberté, equalité, fraternité.
Yeah, exactly. And so he said, Lord Almighty, how does one shut up a hysterical woman on the internet? It's as bad as the rad films, but way less colorful and funny. And you said someone is very upset that he cannot reconcile his advocacy of egalitarianism with his supposed rejection of feminism. True. And you said, and you're not against feminism unless you have magical thinking, which explains how we can have egalitarianism without feminism. And so you said, okay, we'll look at this one. You said, listen, maybe you have a great explanation of how, and maybe you can describe it looks like it runs off here. Listen, maybe you can give a great explanation of how it is that we have an egalitarianism without feminism. Maybe I just haven't heard it before. I'm happy to have a good faith conversation if you have a principle.
Yeah, I was saying if you have a principle for explaining how you can have your egalitarian cake and eat it too without the feminism part getting snuck in. Because egalitarianism means we're all equal. All people are created equal before the law and all this sort of thing. And so what you're going to necessarily see, and this is why I always say this, you don't see Mary Wollstonecraft writing A Vindication of the Rights of Woman until exactly the French Revolution and this egalitarianism becoming like the dominant intellectual narrative of the time. Thomas Paine and her and all of these French, British, and American intellectuals, this was like the foundation of it. And so she wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in response to an essay called The Vindication of the Rights of Man. So immediately upon expanding the rights of men, you get a woman responding with, well, I'm going to outline the rights for women then, because are we not part of mankind? So you cannot separate them. You cannot take them apart. And as somebody who writes about feminism all the time, which James does, he doesn't really start studying feminism until second wave, I don't think. I don't think he knows the true roots of it going back to this period.
He probably doesn't.
Then he would know this stuff. And so I was just trying to get through to him and say, hey, look, I want to talk about the problem. Like, you don't have to just make fun of me and call me a silly woman. We can actually talk about the problem because you're a very smart guy. Maybe you have a framework or a foundation that solves this problem, but I haven't heard it yet. So.
Right. Absolutely. And yeah, I don't think he studied intellectual history or the historical roots. He would be much in favor of actually reading your book and finding out how this relates to witchcraft, and he could bring in magic and all this stuff, but it's part and parcel of the Enlightenment.
Yeah. And I think that's why I have lovely, wonderful fans out there who keep tagging him and telling him to read it. And he's just like, no, thank you. I am not interested.
I think he thinks he's an expert on this and doesn't need anybody else's opinion. Shout out to Retrocalypse, throws in $5 and says, I was an atheist from 1995 to 2018. Most popular atheism completely disdains philosophy. True. All the writers of that era readily admit it. Pure materialism. That's very, very true. Yeah. And we had 2 super chats come in over on the Streamlabs. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Vagisil throws in $3 and says, atheists are just spiritual Karens that want to complain to the manager of the universe face to face about problems that are entirely their fault. They all have the same soy morph physiology instead of inverted bob haircut.
Oh,
thank you very much, Dr. Vagisil, for that. And then shout out to BMX 1966, throws in $5, says, good day from Australia, DPH and Rachel. Well, thank you so much, BMX 1966. Glad you're here, brother. Okay, moving back and moving through this. So you asked him to give an example or a principle. He says, why is this woman still talking to me after I repeatedly dismissed her? She's not for patriarchy. Laugh my ass off, exclamation mark. What?
I know. Just wait, it gets better.
So you said, oh, really? So you believe that you can have egalitarianism without giving women equal rights? I've never heard anyone argue this before. I'm interested. I'm not going to pick you, as if, like, again, like it's
I'm
always
a
ends up that,
girl.
yeah, it's always like you're either jealous of James, you're just too dumb, he can't deal with you, or this sort of self-grandizement that he's just too based. And you said, I've already picked, sir. Now, if you could kindly explain how feminism is not a necessary entailment of egalitarianism, I would be so appreciative. Christians cut off a lot of heads over theological disputes, princess. And you said, my husband always says, my husband always says, think of power like a sword. The Christian and the liberal will agree not to grab the sword while they're agreeing the leftist grabs it and cuts off both their heads. And
yeah, and then I went on to say, like, the Enlightenment, this is what the Enlightenment did. When you try to say, okay, we're all going to be equal, we're all going to mind our own business, we're going to leave each other alone, I'm going to let you, we're going to live and let live, okay? That's what libertarianism is. And I used to be libertarian. I went through my libertarian phase, like everybody does. And until I realized, this is a funny, weird, stupid story, that like my moment that I realized libertarianism was not tenable was the very first episode of The Walking Dead. So this is like 2010, I want to say. And we're sitting there watching it, and it's like the zombie apocalypse breaks out. The whole world is in chaos. Everybody's dying or dead. What's the first thing people do? Because it just got me thinking about apocalyptic stuff, right? What's the first thing people do? It's not look for food or ammo or medicine or water. It's pick a leader. Pick someone to be in charge. The first thing you do when the shit hits the fan, if you get attacked by an enemy, if there's a natural disaster, if there's a zombie apocalypse, the first thing human beings will do is demand that somebody be the leader and take charge. Right. It is. And it was like the beginning of me realizing, oh shit, hierarchy is inevitable. We will never and can never have this situation where, oh, we all just live and let live, and everyone's their own little monarch and their own little pope, and you just go over here and do your thing and I'll stay over here and do my thing. It's never going to be like that, because you're presuming that there won't be evil people who will take the sword and cut off both your heads with it. Right? When we try to have this world that James wants, there will always be someone who's going to have the will to power, grab the sword, and start chopping off everyone else's head, and they're going to take power. And that's why he was talking about liberalism being fragile. He knows this is the fundamental weakness of it. And somehow he thinks that if we recapture the institutions and keep the Marxists out, that we can just indoctrinate everyone with Americanism, and like everyone's going to fall in line and follow it.
Yep. So he responds by, Christians cut off a lot of heads over theological disputes, princess. And then he says, who let you out of the kitchen? And you said, I'm tweeting from the kitchen making breakfast for dinner. And you show that you got bacon out.
I posted a screenshot of the bacon I was cooking. Everybody always says that to me. They're like, get back in the kitchen. And I'm like, I'm tweeting from the kitchen while I'm cooking. So I was just giving him back some sass, because like, look, if you want to play that game, I'm pretty good at the insult game too. And we can have a little bit of fun with that. And I was super nice to him. I did leave him alone, because it's like, look, if he doesn't want to talk to me, he doesn't have to talk to me. And if he doesn't want to read my book or hear what I have to, he doesn't have to do any of that. But I just think it's a little bit arrogant of you, sir, to be on Twitter acting like you've got this all figured out. Like, you just know what's going on. And if anybody challenges you, it's like, oh, get back in the kitchen, princess. And it's like, dude, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. Who let you out of the kitchen? I'm tweeting from my kitchen, making breakfast for dinner, which it looks like lovely bacon.
Yeah.
And then you said, stop advocating for egalitarianism, which promotes all the forms of social justice you claim to impose, including feminism. And then he insinuates you're a clown
Mm-hmm.
and says,
Oh,
listen,
that's when I said, yeah.
listen, maybe you have a great explanation. Okay, so that was one of the earlier ones we read.
Yeah.
And then you said, who said anything about bliss? I'm not sure
Yeah,
where
because
that comes.
if you go up a little bit more, scroll back up a little, right there, down a little bit, no, the other way. Oh, right up here. Because I started saying, I was telling him, look, the Constitution is lovely and all, but it's an Enlightenment document that was flawed. You know, there were a lot of things in the Constitution that allowed for us to end up right where we are now. One of the prime examples would be it's separation of church and state. Now, that's not actually enshrined in the Constitution. It does not. It just says they can't make a federal, like nationwide state religion. That's what the Constitution actually says. And the founders, if you read their letters back and forth to each other, they assumed that most of the states may adopt an actual, like they thought maybe some of the southern states would be Anglican or Presbyterian, like officially. They just
Right.
didn't want a federal religion established. And they did want freedom of religion. But what I was trying to say to James is there's a fundamental flaw there too, because then you have no reason to tell the Church of Satan that abortion is not their sacrament. Okay. These are the problems. You can't just introduce freedom and go there, everything's solved because we all have freedom now. That is not a fundamental axiom on which you can build morality, make ought claims, or any of this stuff. So,
Right.
I mean, he says feminism isn't egalitarian. And I said,
Oh, really? So you believe that you can have egalitarianism without giving women equal rights? I've never heard anybody argue this before. I'm interested.
yeah.
And then you said,
So
I am for patriarchy, but you, a man,
it's right there.
oh, you, a
yeah.
man, are for egalitarianism, yet you claim to be against feminism. Is there a problem with me noticing the contradiction? Yeah,
And
because
then
you
he
said
says, you're for patriarchy explicitly. I'm a man. Go away. Okay,
Right.
fair enough. Fair enough. No, I'm not going to be like one of those women that's like, you have to listen to me because I have important opinions. But I was just saying, like, look at this. Look at this. He says, I hate the Constitution. And then
Yep.
I respond with,
loves
loves
the
the
Enlightenment,
Enlightenment.
liberty, equality, fraternity, but then rails against feminism. Please help me understand this contradiction.
Like, at least you can disagree with me, but I'm consistent. What he's saying is a performative contradiction. He's saying, I want liberty, equality, and fraternity, but I don't want feminism. I don't want socialism. It's like, well, sir, you want these people to be able to have the freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble and all of these freedoms to vote in whatever it is they want. And if what they want is socialism, how are you supposed to tell them no?
Exactly. And as you highlighted here on egalitarianism, egalitarian doctrines are generally characterized by the idea that all humans are equal in fundamental worth or moral status. Now, as a Christian, we can agree with that. From a rational Enlightenment perspective, they have no basis for it. And it says egalitarian doctrines have supported many modern social movements, including the Enlightenment, feminism, civil rights, and international human rights. So right there.
Mic drop.
Exactly.
I win the Twitter battle, James. Sorry. You
Yeah,
lose. and then Jim
here's Jim
Bob.
Bob. Real liberalism has never been tried with his soft chin. And
He got it so perfect, like with the little eyelashes and everything. It's so perfect. I love it.
Jim Bob's hilarious.
Yeah.
So
Basically that was the dispute. It was me just saying, you can't say I like these parts of the Enlightenment. I want to keep these parts, but I don't like these other parts, and we're just going to like separate them out. And I'm going to make my own like moral ought claims as an atheist based on concepts of human rights. But then I'm going to say, all these social justice movements, they all appeal to human rights. They all do. And whenever, like, I was looking for a place where he was going to extrapolate on how, yes, I believe in human rights, but not these human rights, or why there should be certain limits on human rights. And I can't find anything. Again, it might be out there. He might have said it.
That's one of the reasons I've never engaged with him, because I've seen people like, I think Dr. Taylor Marshall has like responded to him and he just calls people names. He doesn't ever address what they're actually talking about. And so
I just think that's cowardly. I'll just say, I think that's cowardly. Like when Andrew has critics who take him to task on stuff, he will argue with them for hours in the Discord and Twitter spaces. He will have hours long conversations with his detractors, with his critics, with his haters. And so do I as a woman. Like, this is why I hate simps so much, you guys, because it's like I'm just a stupid housewife lady. What do I know? But I'm at least willing to, like, okay, let's hash this out. Let's talk through the problem. You think there's a problem with my idea or my ideas, and I think there's a problem with yours. Let's work them through. Let's debate it out. Let's hash it out and figure this out so that we can solve the problem. And he doesn't seem to want to do that. He just seems to want
to. It's kind of what the super chatter says here. Rogue AI 1679 throws in $10 and says, "Great show, guys. The Lindsay thing is weird. You'd think even if he disagrees with Ortho Bros, you'd think someone as well read as him would realize he needs allies instead of he's snarky and disrespectful." True. He's very disrespectful, especially now that he knows if you're Orthodox. And that's the video we're getting ready to play. He recently went on the Michael Malice podcast and he addresses the ortho beefs that he's been having on Twitter. So thank you so much, Rogue AI 1679, for the super chat. I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much. And shout out to Levy, throws in $20 over on Streamlabs. Thank you so much. No comment. Really appreciate that, Levy. God bless you. And so let's listen to this, because have you watched this, Rachel?
No,
this is him. So he's on the Anarchist Handbook. This is Michael Malice, fancies himself as an anarchist. And so he's had James Lindsay on and they bring up what's going on. So here, check this out.
James, I am thrilled to have you back on the show because you've been going ham on Twitter even more than usual. And one of the groups that you've been going after, there's several, but you've been going after, I'm sure you share with me low-key kind of contempt for this kind of bougie boomer conservatism and its kind of ineffectualism and this belief that, if Trump just sat down with Nancy Pelosi and had a long discussion, they could come to an agreement and everything would be great in this kind of 1980s Reagan Tip O'Neill fairy tale. But you've also been going after the so-called Christian nationalists, and you've been going at it hard. Can you talk about where you see this movement coming from and why you are so opposed to it?
Well, I mean, it's fun, actually, before I say any of that with that preamble, up until the moment you said Christian nationalists, I didn't know which group out of like 5 that
right.
you might bring up, right?
Oh, we go through all of
them. Was it going to be the Ortho Bros? Was it going to be which are kind of related, sort of, but not
you mean like the Tradcons?
Well, yeah, the Orthodox
okay.
Tradcon specific. Well, there's like a bro contingent of the Orthodox religion that goes on Twitter and acts the fool. So that's the Ortho Bros.
And let me just say, I'm not a big fan of Orthodox Twitter. I think it perpetuates neoteny. I think these are, God bless all of them, but they'll like talk about their
spurgiest soldiers. Our spurgiest soldiers are
personal stuff about girls and like why you shouldn't cuddle, and cuddling is condemned in the canons or something like. I mean, it's just weird stuff.
Yeah.
It's very autistic, and it lacks any sort of truly masculine presence. Like it's not, you don't get the vibe from some of the not all of them, but there's a contingent.
Yes, there's a group of them that, I mean, I feel like there's factions of this in all the different groups, but our faction, it's like they tend to be very doomer, right? Like, oh, this world is just terrible and life is just pain and I should just go be a monastic, but they won't let me because I'm too rage filled. Like that's the kind of thing you see a lot, and I just tend to leave them alone because I know.
Yeah, I do too. I don't normally engage with them, but
I just leave them alone because I don't wish anything bad on them.
Exactly.
But I also don't want to like perpetuate that, and it's not my place as a woman to be involved in it either. But for him to kind of lump me in with Ortho Bros.
Yes. Yeah. We'll wait till he gets going here, and that's where I will just give my criticism of, again, it's just a small contingency. And maybe it's just, they're just young and they just haven't matured or don't have a lot of life experience. But the way they talk about women is like, guys, how are you going to find a wife? Like, I don't know, like they almost promote inceldom. It's almost like
do.
the America First movement.
Yeah. A lot of them are in that. A lot of the like
Ah.
ortho bro types are actually like huge AF supporters, because for a long time a lot of them like really hated me. Now that there's a truce, they're fine with me again and they like me again, but for a long time they didn't because of that. So yeah, they're generally the types that are like, I would try to look for a wife, but all women are evil, you know, demon creatures from hell. And it's just like, oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, what are you supposed to do with that?
Exactly. So just wanted to say that, but then he goes on to his recent experiences with people. So here we go.
Or is it going to be the radical feminists with whom, you know, I had quite the spat a week ago or so? You never.
Oh, I got to bring this back up. Yeah, somebody said, let me pull that up. Rough Hands, thank you so much. Member for 8 months. Thank you so much, Rough Hands. He says, Lindsay has a turtle mouth and I can't unsee it. It's true.
True.
He like sucks in his bottom lip, but God bless him. I hope maybe he eventually comes to Christianity. Let me pull this up. Sorry, guys. All right, let's get into it.
You never know who it's going to be. But yeah, the Christian nationalist movement is one where it's primarily Protestant in its flavor, though there is some overlap dipping into Catholic integralism, dipping into whatever this based ortho bro phenomenon is, where the idea is that the reason that Western civilization has lost its way is because it lost its moorings in a Christian foundation. Some of them are very anti-Jewish. Some of them would say a Judeo-Christian foundation on the other hand. So it's very difficult to tell for sure, you know, which thing they mean. And so the movement has about 30 different characterizations. So it's very difficult to like say, oh, this is what it's about, or this is who's behind it. But the most broad, charitable, generous explanation would be exactly what I just gave, with the idea that there needs to be this kind of revival or callback to Christian values being at the root of American experience. They frequently quote John Adams, which I find personally hilarious, where he said that the Constitution was written for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. So obviously, a Christian prince is necessary for us to have a moral and religious people, or maybe it's going to be a constitutional monarchy, or maybe it's going to be an outright theocracy, or maybe it's going to be dominionism, or I mean, there's any number of things that it can mean. So that's kind of what it is. Where is it coming from? I mean, that depends on which dimension of it we want to talk about. I think there is an organic dimension where you have a set of emotions that I am very sympathetic to, where people are frustrated, they're desperate, they're scared, they feel like their institutions have been stolen from them, which they are correct about. Their institutions have been stolen. They don't see a way back. Maybe some kind of a hardline, muscular Christianity would enable us to rally around a single banner or cross or something and run a crusade and take back our civilization, or preserve aspects of it in different locations. Again, there's different kind of perspectives on what it wants to accomplish. And I think that the organic side of it is driven by that. I don't think it's all organic. Anything with this much potential to be disruptive is very likely to have been infiltrated by federal agents, chaos agents. I suspect that that is the case with Christian nationalism as well, whether they know it or not. Some of the players are very likely to be, you know, your typical proto, you know, your, what is it, the meme of the like the glowy poking something with a stick saying, come on, do a J6. And I think that there's a huge element of that. I think that the literature in the federal government, whether it's around the House Select Committee on January 6th in particular, which I've read a lot of that documentation, or whether it's in the like DHS or FBI reports, are centering in on that this phenomenon, broadly construed as Christian nationalism, is somehow behind what happened on January 6th. And so you can kind of see the makings of a trap there. The wholly evil enemy of the people, enemy of all that's good media apparatus, very readily, kind of fluidly, gender fluidly, slides between Christian nationalist and white nationalist as though they are the same thing, playing upon this kind of low information stereotype. And it's not hard actually to find within the Christian nationalist camp people saying things like, that CRT is expressly anti-white and playing a white identity politics card, or to find within them even outright neo-Confederates who are kind of pushing that line, and thus to gin up this idea that there is a one-to-one isomorphism between Christian nationalism and white nationalism, or even Nazism, which carries a specific extra irony in the last month and a half, seeing what the left has done with those tropes coming out of the Arab world. So what is it? It's a lot of things. Where does it come from? Organically, I think it comes from a frustration. Inorganically, I think it comes from opportunism on the part of the media government apparatus to discredit conservatives and conservative Christians and Christians more broadly, using this label to whip people up into doing ridiculous things or participating in anti-Semitism online or other things that could get them anti-gay activity or whatever. A lot of them bear the Ugandan flag, like people put the trans flag in their bio, or now the Palestinian flag, and other people on the other side have the Israeli flag. Lots of people put flags. A lot of them have the Ugandan flag. What in the hell do Christian nationalists have to do with Uganda? Why do they care about Uganda? Well, because Ugandan Christians are in the sights of the world right now because they were putting gay people to death. That's the reason. If you ask them if that's the reason, they won't tell you that that's the reason. They'll deny that that's the reason, because the first commandment, as far as I can tell, of Christian nationalism is bearing false witness. So at any rate,
are you accusing them of being subversive and sneaky?
I do think they are subversive. That's why, in fact, I no longer refer to them as being on the right at all. They're not like the boomer cons even. They are, in my terminology, the right hand of the left. And what I've been trying to warn people about now for at least a year, pretty specifically, but longer than that, usually I usually get a lot of punishment for doing this, is like, so I used to fight, right? Like I used to fight for money. This was a thing I did in my early 20s. I know a bit about fighting. I'm not saying that I can go knock out a ortho bro or something like that. But what I am saying is that if I can train you to watch my left fist over and over and over again, I'm going to hit you with the right cross and you're never going to see it coming. So it used to be a thing that I would do, because a lot of fighters do this, is they throw out the right, or they throw out the left jab, they left jab, and then they follow it with something else, and then they left jab, and the guy gets reactive to the pattern off the left jab, and then whack, you hit him with something from the right that they're not looking at. And I think that's called the rope-a-dope, isn't it?
No, that's not. The rope-a-dope comes from Muhammad Ali, where he lets people try to hit him and he avoids the punches. So I question this guy's history of fighting, but we just have a couple seconds left.
Matter of fact. And it's a standard technique in boxing, or kind of in all fighting sports. And so if you're only watching what the left is doing, the woke. If you're only watching the left, you're at serious risk of getting knocked out from the right. But in this case, I don't think that this is actually different. I think that they've both left the path of liberty. And so in some sense, I see it as the right hand of the left. There are other reasons as well, but the boxing analogy is succinct enough for the moment.
Okay. So, Rachel, what are your thoughts on that? It was your first time seeing it? Oh, you're muted, Rachel. Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I hit the wrong button. You guys might remember that James did a show with Jay on
Yes.
Courtney Turner's YouTube, and Courtney and I are very good friends. Love her to pieces. There's a few things we disagree on, like all friends. But one thing we disagree on is she does tend to be more liberty oriented, like James. And to me, the whole idea that because she doesn't like Christian nationalism either, and she agrees with James. They think it's like a big Fed psyop thing. And James was like warning everybody earlier in the year that the feds are trying to get everybody into Christian nationalism, and they're going to use your anti-gay and your anti-liberty rhetoric to throw you in jail. Now, is that a thing? Yes, it is a thing. But they do that with all the movements. Like this, again, this is something that I study all the time, is how they co-opt social movements. The feds are in the Marxist movements. They're in the Black Lives Matter movements. They're in the Christian nationalist movements. They're in all of them, and they use all of them against each other. So is that a thing? Yes. But where I disagree is this idea, this problematic idea that Andrew has started to talk about a lot, that everyone else is fine to have power, right? Secularists should be in charge of things because somehow we have this idea that if you're secular, you're going to be neutral. Like you'll have this neutrality, but that Christians are going to want a theocracy. There's always this fear mongering that if Christians have any political power, we're going to get rid of liberty, right? And it's like, wait a minute, why do you guys all think that we should accept this ridiculous notion that secularists should be in power and the government should be secular because somehow that means they'll be fair and neutral and even-handed? Have you seen, have we ever seen that bear out? No, we haven't. So when they want to talk smack about Christian nationalism, do I know there's a Fed element? Yes. Am I down with the Nick Fuentes America First version of Christian nationalism? No, because they want us to be under papal authority. They're like trad Caths that want that. I don't want that either. I don't want a theocracy. But to say that Christians are the only people who somehow shouldn't have power because we are going to put limits on some degeneracy that you like, that's bullshit. And then this idea, he's talking about the right as a right hand of the left, and that we can't just watch the left side, we have to also watch the right side, which gives us this false presupposition that somehow being in the middle again is going to have neutrality or like a moral, like I have the moral high ground because I'm a centrist. I'm not a far right person and I'm not a far left person. Therefore, you can be sure that I'm going to be neutral and even-handed. And like I said, that doesn't work either, because as long as you're sitting there trying to be moral and neutral and even-handed with things, the extreme left or the extreme right's going to just take back over. So I think the solution is maybe not have this right-left dialectic. Maybe not have this system where you necessarily, by giving one person one vote, you're always going to have the right against the left. You're always going to have the pendulum swinging from one back to the other. And it creates instability. This is why the founders said retarded things. Like I used to think this was cool when I was libertarian, when Jefferson would say, every 200 years, the blood of the tree of liberty has to be, watered with the blood of tyrants or something, like we're going to have perpetual revolution every 200 years forever and ever. It's like, these are the problems with it. So.
Right. I couldn't agree more. And so Paul Vanderklay, and that's actually the tweet that we're looking at. Paul Vanderklay has done a conversation. Again, he's this Calvinist guy. I think he has a church in Sacramento, California. And he's sort of adjacent to the Peterson Paggio circles. And this is his tweet. If you want to understand more deeply what Conceptual James is doing on Twitter, listen to him, but you won't. Can't get this level of nuance and understanding with tweets. Honest people will tell you what they think if you listen. And then goes on. Once you understand a bit, then you can assess what you agree with. Where do you differ? How will you respond? Twitter has a spirit, and it will have you, if you are unwise, you can play with that spirit and through that spirit and even wield that spirit to agree. But if you go in blindly, not understanding or seeing that spirit, it'll make you the fool. And
Calvinist prattle.
Yeah. And he's going to insinuate, dang it, I did it again. These are these subtweets. So I was reading this and then these subtweets. If you listen to James, you can figure out why he's been drive-buying on the ortho bros and bras. If you want to engage, figure out how to play, but mind the spirits. And he insinuates, we're going to watch that clip from his video where he covers this. He insinuates you're against the fool because you're trying to have a nuanced philosophical conversation on Twitter when you were just asking specific questions about egalitarianism. And these were yes, no, or yes, but. These are short tweets. It's
and
not
in the tweets also, I said, let's have a real conversation outside of this. Like, let's sit down and do it. Let's hash it out.
As did Jay Dyer.
I texted Jay. I texted Jay and I was like,
no.
I was like, can you talk to James? And he's like, I already tried. And I'm like, I'm not having any luck either. So first of all, you can have pretty good nuanced threads on Twitter if you want to. It's not that you can't. And we could take it to a Twitter space. If you want more nuance and you want long form discussion, there's Twitter spaces. We could do it on YouTube. We could do a written back and forth. Like there's any number of ways we could do this. But I was the one trying to get James to actually address the problem in his worldview. And he was the one just posting clown emojis and calling me a silly woman. So it's like, I don't know that I'm the fool. But okay.
And so this was one of the followers of James, reason will win. And so James, one of the reasons why he claimed that he was taking shots at Jonathan Pageau is because he attended the ARC forum that Jordan Peterson has put together. And he noted that there were so many Christians of different persuasions that were giving a very Christian perspective on the culture. And he deemed that he said he felt like it was a counter-enlightenment project and he doesn't want to be a part of it. And so Peterson, when he got back, this was from a recent conversation with, like, was it Chris Williamson, the British guy that has a large YouTube channel? He's like, is ARC Forum a counter project? Yes, it is. Conceptual James, Michael Malice. There we have our answer from the mouth of the founder. And so here, let's hear Jordan Peterson. And it's not like we agree with all of Jordan Peterson's stuff, but he's highlighting that the utilization of pure reason does not establish a hierarchy of values, and that we need a counter enlightenment to the Enlightenment. So here's what this is from.
I think we're at the beginning of the counter enlightenment.
So it's sped up. That's not me. That's not me. That's just how it is. See, I got it on normal. Here, I can slow it down so it's not so fast. Okay. Come on.
That might be too slow.
I think we're at
I think so.
Probably
the beginning of the counter enlightenment. The propositions, the Enlightenment view of man is wrong. And this, out of the Enlightenment view came science. But the science now indicates that the Enlightenment view of man is wrong.
What do you mean?
Well, the Enlightenment types believe that we could orient ourselves in the world, let's say empirically, and this is Sam Harris's proposition. You can abide by the facts. You can orient yourself as a consequence of the dispassionate analysis of the facts. You can't. And I would say the artificial intelligence engineers have figured that out. The postmodern literary critics have figured that out. The psychologists and physiologists of perception have figured it out. And the neuroscientists have figured that out. So it's not just the evidence that that view is necessarily incorrect is overwhelming and multidimensional. You can't orient yourself by the facts. Why? Because there are as many facts as there are things. In fact, if you combine things, the nature of the combination is also a fact. So there's as many facts as there are things and combinations of things. Well, you can't orient yourself by that. You drown in chaos. It's like you're standing in the desert and there's an infinite number of directions you could go. Well, how do you choose a direction?
And that's showing up in that most recent survey that I just mentioned. People feeling meaninglessness, purposelessness.
Right. They're lost in the desert. Yeah. They're lost in the desert. And the desert is the desert of facts. It's dead facts.
Especially given how few people can agree on, is this a fact or is this counter?
But that's also a problem. It's not like the facts are necessarily self-evident. Some facts are, and I suppose to some degree, what the scientific corpus is the elaboration of a set of.
So I think this is the fuller version where what we just watched cut off.
The desert is the desert of facts. It's dead facts.
Especially given how few people can agree on, is this a fact or is this counter?
That's also a problem. It's not like the facts are necessarily self-evident. Some facts are, and I suppose to some degree, what the scientific corpus is the elaboration of a set of incontrovertible facts. I've read recently that the whole Big Bang narrative is starting to come apart. That was a fact for a long time. Now, I don't know if that's the case.
True.
I don't know enough about it, but my sense is that the new discoveries from the Webb telescope have made many of the presumptions upon which the Big Bang model was based questionable. So now I don't want to fall down a postmodern rabbit hole, because although the issue of what constitutes a fact is a very complicated issue. Anyways, you can cut to the chase by pointing out that we organize facts in a hierarchy of value. And see, the thing about, I'm trying to make this case in the book. You do this when you look at the world. You can't look at the world except through a hierarchy of value. So for example, as we're sitting here, there's an infinite number of places we could be pointing our eyes. Like I could be talking to you and looking at this little spot on the concrete floor, or the spot beside it, or the infinite number of spots surrounding it constantly, but I'm not. I'm looking at your eyes. Okay, why? Because I'm prioritizing them. So the fact that dominates in this landscape is the fact of your eyes. Why? I can use your eyes to evaluate our shared focus, right? And that's why we look at other people's eyes.
That's why humans have got white around the outside.
Exactly, so that we can see what other people are attending to, so that we can get insight into the story. A story is a description of a hierarchy of value.
Stories can be fantastical though, right? If they're untethered to anything, I can make a Harry Potter's a story. Now
if they're untethered to anything, you won't find them interesting.
Because they won't resonate.
They won't grip you. Yeah, they're tethered. Stories are tethered to reality in a very, very complicated way, because reality isn't what presents itself.
Yeah. So his point is that there's a hierarchy of values, and that the Enlightenment project of pure reason is undermined by multiple fields of research, academia, but then that it just fundamentally doesn't make any sense. And therefore we need something to orient our values and orient our understanding of facts in the world. So this is something that, again, James Lindsay, that's why he's in a beef with Peterson and Pageau. And that's why when Pageau posted that little limerick, that little poem about the Enlightenment, he got so mad. Now you can understand the perspective there.
Yeah, and I mean, James Lindsay has made a big he was involved in that study, which the thing with the studies where they submitted all the fake studies, which was great. Another thing we love him for. We love that that thing he did. But then he wanted to like keep it going. So he started with attacking the feminism and then the queer theory and the trans stuff. And I was just trying to like tell him I don't agree with Pajot and Peterson on everything, but they're right about this. They're right about this particular problem that you have no grounds on which to criticize any of this stuff if your mantra is liberty, equality, fraternity, egalitarianism, human rights, freedom to do what I want, freedom to pursue happiness. What if cutting off my junk makes me what if me as a mom, it makes me happy to cut off my son's junk and put him in a dress? Who are you to tell me I can't? Why ought I not? And I couldn't believe the lengths he's willing to go to completely avoid that. You would think he'd have something, maybe even something insufficient, or maybe something I disagree with, but you'd think he would have something. And anytime I try to steer him back to that, he just wanted to get away from it. And to me, it's like, you can't be this intellectual out there if you're not even willing to address stuff like this. And I'm just like a homemaker with a little book, and I'm willing to tackle these bigger questions. It's disappointing. It's kind of feminine.
Yeah, I agree. And as somebody said, it's not like Peterson and James Lindsay are that far apart, because I did a whole stream on, is Jordan Peterson Christian?
Yeah.
And according to the consensus of the chat, no, he's not Christian, because he doesn't explicitly state a faith in the Trinity or Christ or anything like that. He uses these archetypes, and that's really the basis for his hierarchy. But at least now, this, for everybody watching, you have a perspective on where James was coming from and why he was so vicious at Pagio and called him a fascist. Jonathan Pagio, of all people. I mean, come on. So this was Paul Vanderklay. Then he did a conversation, James Lindsay's Against Magic, Twitter drive-by against the Ortho Bros and Bras. And so we're going to get Rachel's unfettered live reaction to the video. She hasn't watched this, of which she has brought up, and he even talks about her. So we'll start right here where he gets in. And what he's trying to make the point is that, so he's looking at ARC, and he went to the ARC meeting, and he met James there. And he has this meme that says, a vision for a better world, ARC, the thing that Jordan Peterson's created, and then religion is holding ARC. Because again, so many Christian speakers were there of all different persuasions. So it's not like some unified worldview. And I'm sure they disagree on very crucial things in regards to paradigms and worldviews. But we're going to start here. So this is Paul Vanderklay trying to describe this whole thing, coming from a non-biased Calvinist, looking at the Ortho Bro online community and James Lindsay.
So, yeah.
But before we go, guys, smash that like. And if you have any super chats, let me actually catch up real quick. We had a few over on Streamlabs. AC throws in $3. Thank you so much, brother. God bless you and the family. He says, PVK addresses orthodoxy from what everyone wants, an appeal to consensus fallacy and not the truth in the person of Christ. I like him, but suspect people would rather have Disney than a real defense of Christianity. A day will come when man rejects, and he has the Orthodox cross. So true, AC. And then Warren Hess throws in $10, says, good evening. Great show. Take two. Great show from two of my favorite YouTube superstars. Well, I don't know if we're superstars, but thank you so much, Warren Hess, for the $10 super chat.
We prefer the term niche internet micro celebrities.
Yeah, that's probably more accurate. Yeah. But if you guys have any comments or want to show some love, feel free to send in a super chat on Dono Chat, Streamlabs, or YouTube. Okay. So here we go. PVK's perspective on everything.
Yeah, ARC is still very amorphous, and we don't quite really know where it lands. And you can hear Glenn and I sort of working on that. Now, Neil Murray, if you don't want to watch the rest of the video, in a lot of ways, Neil Murray sort of, I think, kind of nice, succinctly gets at part of what's going on here. I see James as hyperprotective of the U.S. Constitution and sees great danger in any toppling of the primacy of the secular. Jonathan sees danger in the primacy of the secular. It's fun that they had a chat before with no major disagreements, yet now James won't talk. will he talk? Won't he talk? You know, we'll see what comes. And Benjamin wants to have him in there. But again, this is all part of the reassessment of the secular and where things are going. Because again, it's hard to put this stuff. Secularity is coming apart. And I said, you know, modernity is collapsing. Yeah, secularity is coming apart. You know, I said, well, where is it coming apart? You can see it coming apart in the Hagia Sophia being turned from a museum into a mosque. You can see it coming apart as India becomes more self-consciously Hindu, and there's more tensions between Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims in India. When freedom of religion sort of recedes, because freedom of religion is built on this construction of this particular definition of religion that in many ways a lot of religious people like myself have been chafing against. And now that it's receding, you can see on one hand, it's like, yeah, well, you know, everybody's got a religion. And that the loss of the idea that religion can sort of be segmented is kind of a problem, because again, the religion that was sort of assumed by everyone was sort of a Protestant Christianity that was always under the surface. And Roman Catholics that came to America learned to abide by that, and some basically adopted it, while others have sort of chafed against it. But now, as we're getting, as I said in the earlier videos about ARC, secularity and modernity is assaulted from the right and assaulted from the left. James Lindsay very much wants to keep secularity here and to continue to bolster it. And so his side of the divorce of the church of atheism has been keep secularity alive. And so I think Neil Murray really nails it. I want to say a few things about the agent arena relationship here with respect to this conversation. It's Twitter. So actually I posted this on Twitter today. So someone sends me this thing with Alex Trebek saying, you know, something you can describe in detail that almost everyone agrees with until they say its name. And someone puts down Calvinism. And this is a hilarious joke.
Not even close. Not even close.
Also, I'm sorry, but his whole take of like, this is Twitter, it's not for nuance. It's like, yeah, but also you're a boomer for that.
Well, and that's why Elon extended the character. Now you can write a whole freaking book on Twitter.
You can record videos and post them, which I do all the time. You can have Twitter Spaces.
We're live on Twitter right now.
Twitter Spaces, yeah. So it's like, that's kind of a stupid boomer take.
It's a boomer take. He doesn't understand the structure of X and it as a new medium.
Yeah.
You know, Luke and a bunch of people are always saying, well, what you call Calvinism, we call Christianity. And I say, exactly. And so Father Barnabas Powell says, oh, come on. And it's a joke. It's Twitter. Twitter should be used for fun. Now, you can share articles. You can do a lot of different things with Twitter. But one of the things you're not going to have is a careful, nuanced conversation. The structure of the platform simply does not encourage it or facilitate it very well. It just doesn't happen. The form is rather schizophrenic. And so when I saw this dust up between James and Jonathan Pajon, his following, I thought, yeah, I'm not surprised at all we're having this dust up because of what's happening in the culture with respect to the secular. And so when you look at, again, Jonathan's tweet about, you know, naive. See, naive is a little bit, I wouldn't phrase it like Jonathan did, but the way Jonathan phrased it is effective for Twitter because it causes reaction. And so you get this chain reaction that happens on Twitter, and you sort of get these little Twitter explosions. Believe the secular Promethean. Yeah, that's exactly what this is like. Now, to the degree to which, now calling it satanic, I wouldn't do that. I also see the blessings in the secular. The secular allowed
Protestant cringe.
So bad. I was just about to say that, basically, yeah.
Well, here you're getting ready to come up, so just one sec.
If you've been watching some of my, allowed a whole lot of Jesus smuggling, and I'm going to continue to talk about that because I think Jesus is getting, I think the Christian Jesus is continuing to infiltrate Islam. And we see this in the work of some Christian missionaries in Islamic countries. There's a lot of contention in this, and there's going to have to be a lot of nuance in it. And I know some people are going to come at me on Twitter and want me to, well, come on, fight me on Twitter. It's like, I'm not going to fight you on Twitter. You can say what you want about me on Twitter. I'm not going to block you, and I'm not going to fight you. Well, maybe someday I haven't had to use the blocking at all because I just think in most cases, if someone says something that sort of annoys me or sort of gets a reaction, the worst thing I can do on Twitter is react because it just adds to the chain of reaction. So just let it go by. They're just tweets. That's all they are. And I disagree with naming it after a letter of the alphabet. I think that's a silly thing. back tweets on videos. You would see that. You wouldn't walk back tweets on Twitter. You
Bless
would walk
his
back
heart.
tweets on videos. And again, people would sort of condemn that. And it's like, this is a game and it's how we plays the game. So my wife, years ago already, my wife vowed to never play Risk with me again because my wife said that I was being mean. My wife doesn't like to play games with me because in those specific arenas, I like to win and I have fun winning and I can be trollish. And my wife doesn't particularly enjoy when I play games in a certain way. And so she's like, well, not playing Risk with you, not playing these games with you. And so that's fair enough. Now, with some of my sons, we really enjoy playing games like that. And it's cutthroat and it's troll. So now these sub-personalities are revelatory. They do tell us about individuals and sort of in vino veritas, well, in Twitter veritas to a degree, sometimes maybe people reveal something about them through these little sub-personalities. And again, James Lindsay on Twitter is James Lindsay on Twitter. It's how he rolls on Twitter. It just is. Now, most people tend to be more reactive on Twitter than they are in a larger form. You have the agent arena relationship. And, you know, generally speaking, just a few minutes reading somebody's Twitter stream, you'll get a sense of who they are. And I thought this was a great example. So I'd never heard of Rachel Wilson. So then I went to her. So here's Rachel Wilson, and she's got Rach for patriarchy. And then she's got the, you know, she got all the signals here. She's got the Orthodox cross, mother of five patriarchist, author of Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation, out now. And she had a talk with Tucker Carlson back when he was on Fox. And so, you know, she's pretty much, and again, if you just see a little bit of what someone's in profile, you're going to say, oh, her and James Lindsay on Twitter, that's going to be explosive. And so sure enough, her tweet is, I don't hate it, but it's inherently flawed. They're talking about egalitarianism and Protestantism and all of these things. You never answered my question. Is egalitarianism
Talking about the Constitution there, sir.
Yeah, where did Protestantism come into that? He keeps reading Calvinism.
I think he scrolled my Twitter, and I can be pretty critical of Protestantism, but that's because that's my background. So I'm often talking to Protestants, right? I know Protestantism really well. His last name is Vanderklay. My maiden name is the most Dutch name you've ever heard of besides that one. So, like, I know this world really well, so I'm often talking about Protestantism on Twitter. So he probably saw that. For him to assume that, for him to sneak that in there, I think he had to see that somewhere.
I see. Okay, well, we're almost done here with the section with PVK, and then we're going to wrap things up. So smash that like, guys. Send in any super chats if you want to support.
Central to an Enlightenment philosophy or not? And James Lindsay answers, you are for patriarchy explicitly. I am a man. Go away. I mean, it's a great tweet. It's a great tweet. But you know, if you're, you know, let's have a nuanced conversation about the relationship about egalitarianism and the Enlightenment philosophy. And it's like, you're trying to have that on Twitter. It's like trying to discuss philosophy while playing Risk. I suppose you probably can, but usually, you know, it's a dice game with little movable things where, you know, people get all excited about ruling the world. That's what Risk is. And Twitter is an arena. Now, what was interesting about the little spat is that, you know, you could sort of imagine, maybe truthfully, maybe not, because you can only read so much via a tweet, that some people are a little hurt because I thought James Lindsay was on our side. Well, you know, if you're fighting wokeism, yes, he's going to be on your side, but there's lots of sides. Coalitions are sort of big things. And the fact that James Lindsay can sort of cozy up with certain kinds of Calvinists makes absolute sense in terms of the development of sort of the philosophical and political history. Because
well, that's the first true thing you've said, Grandpa. Calvinism fits perfectly with all of this stuff. I'll give my full critique of him when he's done.
Yeah, just one more second. It's almost done, and then we'll pull him off real quick. But I totally agree, and it's like, brother, that's not making the claim you think it is. Like, well, you know, us Calvinists, we're much more aligned with James Lindsay. Dude, that's the problem.
Exactly.
These things are close together. And again, when I saw this little Twitter spat blow up, I was not surprised in the least. And then everybody's like, well, maybe you guys should talk about it. It's like, I don't want to talk about it. We gotta, if we can't laugh at these things, we're just gonna make ourselves crazy. Let people be who they are. Now, you can want them to be different, want them all you want. And if you're serious about that, I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video, because then you're going to have a little bit of thinking and strategy and kind of figure out, well, if they're like this on Twitter, what's the best way to approach them? And, maybe Benjamin Boyce will set up a conversation, or maybe he won't. Probably, I mean, I owe Jonathan an email, but Jonathan and Peugeot and I can talk about this, and because in some ways, so I'm weird in that I'm a Calvinist, but I'm also seeing this recession. But I'm not a Doug Wilson Calvinist is sort of up on post-secularity too. But frankly, I'm probably closer to Tim Keller than Doug Wilson, and Doug Wilson didn't have a lot of kind things to say about Tim Keller, and so there it is. What are you going to say? I actually want to make a video about one of Doug Wilson's recent videos, because I think there's more to say in these issues. And the reason I like YouTube and long form YouTube is you can say more. You just have more time. James Lindsay has been pretty consistent about this whole conversation, and it's super easy to see why. He's a secular materialist in terms of his epistemology. That is his worldview. People speak out of their worldviews. That's what worldviews are. And just sort of strolling up to him to ask him a question like this on Twitter is going to get a reaction like this one. It just is. And what's fun, last night I watched the South Park on Deep Learning, where these little kids in the South Park Elementary, the boys were letting ChatGPT respond to their girlfriend's text, and I thought it was just hilarious. His attack again.
Okay, so I wanted to fast forward to this, because at a point he talks about orthodoxy in America. We're just
I gotta
choosing the shiny new ancient thing. Not that it's true, of course. It's just that it's the truth. Where is that at? It's right up here somewhere.
And Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay are friends, and they did the hoax papers together, but they're also different, and they have different personalities, and they are probably far closer together in terms of their worldview than I am to either of them, but that's the way it is. The divorce of the House of New Atheism, a lot of people asked about that. And what happened again was, in my conversation with James Lindsay, atheism and atheism plus sort of had a divorce, and they went away from each other. And the exiles, which tend to be sort of materialists like Lindsay and Boghossian, and they've not had to suffer what she suffered. And so, they have different stories.
Here you go.
And again, beneath this is...
So let me just read his little slide. He says, reassessment of secularity. Remember how Pazio said just a few years ago, no one would have understood? And then he says, cultures move slowly. And he says, those excited about the shiny ancient new thing they found in Orthodoxy remain a small community in America. Will they remain that way? And so here's his little section and ran on that.
This is what we've been talking about on the channel for a very long time, which is the reassessment of secularity. That secularity is a far deeper and more complex thing than it has been portrayed. And again, a lot of, I keep forgetting, I've got the dog here. A lot of Christians sort of over the last 40 years have sort of denounced secularity, secular humanism, sort of had a slur with it. But, I've continued to evolve, and Tom Holland has impacted me to see that, well, perhaps secularity has been a really sneaky way that the values of Jesus some of the values of Jesus have gone out into the world, even beyond Christianity or beyond secular democracies, beyond the weird world, and have impacted other religions and continue to do so. Jonathan Peugeot keeps saying, well, just a few years, nobody would have understood this. And he's right. And the not understanding this, you sort of see in James Lindsay. And because not understanding doesn't simply mean an inability to understand it cognitively or in the abstract. It means just disagree with it. I don't see the world that way. I see secularity as being a product of the Enlightenment and has nothing to do with Christianity. I disagree. And, Tom Holland debates this one atheist on Unbelievable a while ago, but that's still the line that Richard Dawkins and James Lindsay and others. I don't know where Lindsay stands on it. I don't want to assume something about what he sees about the relationship between Christianity and secularity, because he's got lots of material out there and I haven't really listened to much of it at all. So I don't know how he sort of navigates the narrative and the philosophical political tree and its development. But that's just a common way that a lot of people in that secular materialist can't frame it.
Come on.
The cultures move slowly and they move numbers are pretty small. And and those who are excited about the shiny ancient new thing, which is orthodoxy in America, are really excited because they found a new community and they found a new way to live. And I say, God bless them. But your numbers are pretty small and the culture is really huge. And just because you found icons and saints and relics and all of these really cool things. You know, I often talk about steep slope versus gradual slope. There's a lot of reasons why a lot of people like James Lindsay, if they walk into your if they walk into your venue, they're not going to say, ah, there is a God. Most people don't. They just don't. Some people do, and congratulations, but most people don't.
Okay, that's the only important part of his video, but
Well, let me tell you what my thoughts
Yeah.
are on Grandpa here. Okay, so first of all, he was acting like I just came at James with that tweet he put on there when that was a tweet that was from like midway through the conversation. And I know he said he's not familiar with me, but this is not the first time I've like interacted with James. We've never had like a thread back and forth that kind of blew up like this one did. But I didn't just like come at him with something. And then he was seeming to insinuate that I was the one who was butthurt about it. And that's
Yeah.
not the case.
It's totally misreading exactly of the dynamic.
Well, because he brought up his wife and he was like, my wife is very conflict avoidant and she thinks if I'm competitive, I'm being mean. And it's like, sir, you haven't met me. This is one weird way in which I am very atypical for a woman. People think this all the time. They think that I'm like, people will DM me and be like, Rachel, you're going to upset yourself with all this conflict. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm having the time of my life. This is fun. It's like a sport for me. Like, I like to argue and debate, and I'm very provocative on my own Twitter. In fact, I always say, if you just see me on Twitter, you probably think I'm really mean. And some of my girl friends don't like my Twitter, and they're like, I don't even want to read your Twitter. It pisses me off. So it's like, I was jumping in because I wanted to jump in. I was like, and I was giving him short things like, is feminism an entailment of the Enlightenment or not? Is egalitarianism part of it or not? Like, this was a good back and forth. It was fun. It was a great exercise to go back and forth with him. And I like to banter back and forth with smart people because it challenges me and makes me have to think harder and defend my positions better. So he made a whole bunch of assumptions that because I'm a housewife or because, you know, I have this in my bio or that in my bio.
Yeah, you have all the symbols, the Orthodox cross and patriarchy and Tucker Carlson. You got all the symbols.
Yeah, and I get lumped in with the trad wife movement all the time, but then people never know what to do with me because they're like, but also she's a man because she debates men and also she lifts weights and she has huge shoulders. Look at her huge shoulders. Look at her. She's so combative. But then on the other hand, they'll say the opposite. So people don't know what to do with me, and that's fine. I'm a little weird. It's okay. But I was saying, like, his takes were wrong. His interpretation of the interaction was wrong. His idea that Twitter is not the place that you can have discussions is wrong. And if anything, it's a launch pad, right? It's a launch pad to the bigger discussion, which is how.
And Elon Musk is proof to that. Like, look at how, again, and I want to do an open panel on, you know, I know you and I see Elon Musk in the same way.
Yeah.
But on Elon Musk, but look at, again, just the cultural ripples that have been made through posts on X. Like you said, it's a springboard to larger conversations about these topics. And the way you framed it, you weren't asking for a philosophical explanation. You just asked multiple times.
I was like, is it yes or no? Yes or no? And if it's not a yes or no answer, I was like, hey, if you want to have a longer talk about this, I would love to do it. Because I would love to talk to him about his view of feminism and tell him about mine and see what he thinks of that. And if he has any rebuttals. I have told people before, if you think my book sounds stupid, I will send you a copy for free and you can go through all the source material and you can debunk it for me. Okay. Be the first to go through and debunk everything I say.
Right.
But then he went on to talk about culture and orthodoxy. And it's like, you can tell that this man has no idea what orthodoxy is.
No idea what he's talking about.
You can tell.
Well, some people go in churches and yeah, they may see icons and think that there's a God, but most people don't. What?
Yeah. And this is what Jim Bob talks about all the time with sweatpants culture. And this is coming from Calvinist Christianity myself. They think one of the reasons their version of Christianity is superior is because they think it's less mystical. It is very logical and very rational and it is kind of materialist. It's kind of, it's got a lot of elements that like Platonists and atheists would really love. And in my book, one of the things I get the most criticism for is the fact that I actually tie the Protestant Reformation to the Enlightenment. I actually make the argument in the book that were it not for the Protestant Reformation, we might not have had the Enlightenment at all. And that a lot of the rationalist Enlightenment thinking comes out of the first revolution, which is the Protestant Reformation. So, I mean,
Agreed
he
entirely.
just made a
that's why
whole bunch of assumptions without knowing what I actually talk about, but that's
And
fine.
to back up your point, that's exactly why he's in favor of secularism as a Calvinist, because their whole
Yeah.
ethos that, oh, we can't have a Catholic Church again, we can't have the
Yeah.
papacy controlling culture. And
Yes.
his again, I don't know his familiarity with Orthodoxy, but the
Well, he
fact
was
that
trying
again,
to say people are going to think it's foreign. And I get this from people too. And they're like, well, they're going to walk in your church. They're going to see the weird incense. They're going to hear chanting instead of, if we were singing the old rugged cross with the organ or the piano, that would be fine. But if we're chanting, that's weird. It's foreign. It's Eastern. And Jim Bob always says it's because we're used to sweatpants culture. And Calvinism is very much like this materialist reckoning of Christianity where it's like I can just be in the secular world and act like a secularist and do all the secularist things because I'm already either pre-chosen or I'm not. I'm already, regenerated or I'm not. And none of my works are worth anything. So this is where a lot of the like really black pilling stuff and all the people that leave Calvinism and become atheist comes from, because they do tell you, like even my own dad kind of has struggled with this his whole life because he was raised this way, where he's like, well, I seem to keep fucking up at life, so I guess I'm not one of the chosen, so I guess it doesn't matter what I do, and then he'd try to come back to the faith and then he'd get blackpilled and leave again because this determinist view does end up nowhere. And so I can see why he thinks James Lindsay is on the
his
right
side.
track here, and that our church is the weird mystical church that Americans are going to walk into and reject because it's not, normal. It's not normal American stuff, but it's like people are the reason Orthodoxy is growing so quickly and everybody's leaving. Calvinism is not growing. Last I checked, it was not growing.
No, it's not. That guy said, if you do look at the Pew Research Center on demographics and religious structures in America, only two had it was Islam and Christian Orthodoxy that had like an average age of like late 30s.
Yeah.
Like Calvinism, and then all the mainline Protestants and even the Catholic Church was in the 60s or higher. One church, I forget which denomination, was like 82. It was like, oh my God. Or it was like 70, maybe it was like 76 or something right there. But it was almost in the 80s. Like that's the average age of the attendee, where Orthodoxy has more life. Orthodoxy and Islam are actually the ones that have the most hope for the future in regards to growth because of the average age.
Yeah. And there's this misconception that we like it because it's ancient and that we're trying to go back in time. And I tell people this as often as they will listen. Me being a patriarchist and against feminism, me being Orthodox, any of these things, I'm not trying to go back in time to a time where I think things were good. That's not at all what it's about. It's about the fact that truth is eternal and unchanging, and you're trying to find the things that have the consistency over time that indicate truth. It has nothing to do with, oh, I want it to be the 50s again, or I want it to be, 1919 again prior to the 19th Amendment. It's not about going back in time. It's not about even the fact that the church is ancient. I mean, I think that there are ways you can use that as a supporting argument, but it's not because I'm looking for the oldest thing I can find. That's not at all what it is.
Or because of the icons, or, like reducing Orthodoxy to such a simplistic worldview and making it seem like it's another form of consumerism. And this is where you look at online Christianity, and let's just stay like Orthodox content creation totally outpaces, the average the amount of percentage we take up in US population, but the quality of content, the quality of theology, the quality of understanding is so much higher than you start looking at all these other different groupings of like Christian content creation.
It's not even close. And I know that for like the average person, there's a lot of people, like most everyone in my family. Andrew and I are the only, and even I'm probably a way bigger theology nerd than Andrew is, but like my kids, my friends, my parent, none of them want to hear like my high level philosophical and religious theology stuff. They don't care about it. They kind of want to know like the basics, and they do like, certain aspects of the faith. A lot of people when they first go to a church will be like, oh, I really did like all the beautiful icons.
Right.
I loved the
But that's
chanting.
not why people are Orthodox.
Right,
That was my
right.
point. Like he was reducing
Yes.
it to, oh, it's the pretty icons. No, yeah, the icons are great, and maybe the aesthetics bring people in, but it's the actual mystery. And mysticism is part of the Christian faith. If there isn't a mystical dimension, all you get is a
It's not
rationalistic
faith.
system like
Yes.
Calvinism that totally divorces, like for, I don't know if he's a secessionist or not, but many Calvinists don't believe that miracles can happen anymore, that they cease to happen. And it's like, dude, no, like your faith is dead, and that's why it's dying. Not that his personal faith, I don't know, I'm not trying to judge that. I'm just saying the faith tradition is dying.
Yeah.
It does
Yeah.
not appeal to people because there's nothing there.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I mean that's what led me to seek other things, because I was like, I should probably sort out, why I'm going to the church I'm going to, and like get into all this sort of stuff. And it was like 5 minutes before I was like, oh no, this is bad. They started telling me about like dispensationalism and things like that, and I was like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. I'm gonna have to like look for it, because this is not it. So because it wasn't consistent and it wasn't coherent, and there was all kinds of holes and flaws and contradictions. And the people I was trying to have the conversation with, to be honest, not to sound like I'm some arrogant, genius or anything, but they were like, the pastor at the church I went to was one of the guys that every single Sunday is going to be a sports analogy sermon. It's going to be like a football, or because he was like a basketball coach. He's got to get back for Sunday football, like his whole life revolved around sports. And he's just like kind of a pastor. And so not like an intellectual guy, not somebody who's deep into theology, lovely person, wonderful man. But me asking him high level theology questions, he couldn't answer any of it. So that's why I went looking. But all that just to say, the gentleman we just saw seemed like a very nice guy. He was a jolly
He
guy.
does seem like a nice guy. I will
But,
say that. I've watched a few of his, because AC had me do a sponsored stream on PVK and some of the stuff, because he's hosted Christian transhumanists on his channel to talk. He does seem like a nice guy. I don't mean to disparage him or anything like that. But in regards to this mischaracterization of orthodoxy and really the misframing of your interaction with James, that's why I thought that was worthy of bringing forth for the stream today.
Yeah, definitely. And I get that a lot, and people say that sort of thing all the time, where it's like, why are you on Twitter, and why do you do, and you shouldn't argue with people and all that stuff. And it's like, I get DMs almost daily from people saying, I watched your debate or your husband's debate, or I watched Patrick debate with Adam Green, and I'm going to an Orthodox church now, and I wanted to thank you. Like, this sort of stuff does make a difference. Yes, and when people say nobody's ever changed their mind because of a debate, you couldn't be more wrong. For one thing, I've changed my mind because of debates, and the crucible is growing super fast, and we get people all the time super chatting telling us, I changed my mind because of your debates. Okay, so you can't tell me that that's not a thing.
Yeah.
And
you may
Twitter
not debate your opponent, or you may not convince your opponent, but it's for the audience. And that's where Dyer's done great work.
Yeah.
And
Twitter is actually great for that.
Agreed.
It's great for the spark, and the way that people's minds work now. You have to catch them on some short form stuff sometimes, because they don't want to just jump in straight into a 4-hour or a 6-hour long video on something. A lot of the times it's like, it'll take something to spark their interest and make them go, wait a minute, I got to look this up. And then they check into it. So it is useful.
Yep.
I appreciate Mr. Vanderclay.
Yeah, God bless him. God bless him. And hopefully he's leading people to Christ. And once they become Christian, then they become Orthodox. And so maybe he's just a stepping stone, but God bless him and whatever he's doing. Don't wish any ill on him. But I think that's going to conclude an almost 4-hour stream, which was not the intention, but this was great, Rachel. Thank you so much for coming on.
You say that every time. You guys,
I
he
know.
says this
Well,
every time he has me on, as if he doesn't know what he's in for at this point, right? How many times have I been on your channel? He's like, oh, I'm
a lot.
surprised this went so long. Like, you invited Chatty Cathy to the stream, Patrick. Sorry.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on. Anything you want to, well, we got a couple super chats, and then
Yeah.
anything you want to shill, promote, tell people to do, feel free. Odd Harvey throws in $1 and says, James, anyone who isn't a 90s liberal atheist is a commie fascist Lindsay. Grown men stuck in their adolescent new atheist phase. It's really embarrassing. Well, he definitely has some juvenile characteristics, that's for sure. I am skeptical about his fight history too. I'm just going to throw that out there. As somebody who did do martial arts, compete in Taekwondo, I'm skeptical. I've seen him stand like for a speech. He doesn't appear as the most athletic individual I've ever met, but I could be wrong. And God bless him. I wish him the best. Shout out to my friend and premium member, Thomas Henderson throws in $10. Thank you so much, Thomas. God bless you and the wife. Wish you guys nothing but the best. He said a small fee for 3+ hours of great content. Anglo liberalism is political Protestantism. Wow, true. That morphed into secularism. Great point. Orthodoxy is a critique of both. Thanks, Patrick and Rachel, for shining the light. Well, thank you so much, Thomas. God bless you, man. Really appreciate all your support. Really do. So, and then let me just check the dono chat. Nothing on the dono chat. And so I think we are caught up. Rachel, anything to shill, tell people to do, where to go?
Yes. You guys, if you want to read my little academic paper on feminism and paganism and how it relates to this big pagan revival that we're seeing in all of the predominantly what used to be Christian countries, like why is this phenomenon happening? I would super duper appreciate that. It is on my Substack. It's the most recent article there. So please go read that. And I'll be doing more YouTube after the holidays. I've been kind of taking a break because I was working on that and I'm trying to get the book. Like, I want to get it done by spring. So, but yeah, go check out my Substack because my newer kind of stuff's on there right now. It's rwilson.substack.com.
And your YouTube channel is @_Rachel Wilson.
It's just at Rachel.Wilson, I think.
Oh,
I think you have it in the title. I think you put it in the screen, didn't you?
Let me just check real quick since we're live. I always think there's a @Rachel.Wilson. You are correct. It is in the title. Everybody click that link. You'll go straight to her YouTube channel. Follow her, support her debates over on the Crucible. And I might do something on transhumanism tomorrow because I'm really diving into a lot of stuff on that right now. You're going to be seeing a lot more content on transhumanism for everybody out there. Sorry about you, but that's just what's coming at you. So I was thinking about doing an exposition on the philosophy of extropianism, which is the basic philosophical tenets of transhumanism. May do that tomorrow, may not. I got a lot of research and stuff to do, but Thursday I'll be on with Baselit Analyzer over on his channel. Make sure you go follow him and support him. We're going to be on BLA's channel. We'll be discussing the Russian novel The Master and Margarita, of which the premise is that that Satan, the devil, is actually running the Soviet Union and leading people astray in so many different ways. It's very, very fascinating. So I look forward to that. So with that being said, I will see you guys potentially tomorrow, if not Thursday and Friday. So as always, until then, God bless.